Welcome to 3 a.m. Static. In the stillness of the night, when the world sleeps, the static whispers. Here, we unearth the forgotten, the forbidden, and the unsettling. Tonight's stories will crawl beneath your skin and nest in your thoughts. So turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let the static guide you. Before we begin, let us know where and when you're listening from. Drop your country or the exact time you're tuning in, because at 3 a.m., you're never really alone.
Story 1. The Whispering Walls. The moving van rumbled away, leaving behind a cloud of dust that settled slowly over the overgrown lawn. The house stood silent, a gray monolith against the fading light, its many windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world. It was old, impossibly old, its weathered clapboard hinting at centuries of secrets held within its decaying timbers. Sarah shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, despite the late summer air. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of their previous apartment. This was different. This was isolation. This was unsettling. Mark, her husband, was already inside, surveying their new acquisition with the practiced eye of a man who bought and sold properties for a living. He'd assured her this was a diamond in the rough, a fixer-upper with potential, nestled in a quiet, desirable neighborhood. Sarah, however, felt only a prickling sense of unease, a feeling that ran deeper than simple apprehension about the renovations ahead. The house creaked and groaned around them, the sounds amplified in the twilight stillness. Each floorboard seemed to protest beneath their feet, the old house protesting the intrusion. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and decay, a musty odor that clung to the heavy drapes and the faded wallpaper, whispering tales of forgotten occupants. Even the faintest breeze seemed to carry with it the echoes of whispers, sibilant sounds that danced on the periphery of hearing, just out of reach of understanding. The kitchen, once a vibrant space, was now a cavernous room dominated by a monstrous, ancient stove. Its enamel was chipped and stained, the oven door hanging precariously from a single hinge. Dust lay thick on the countertops, coated with a fine layer of grime that suggested years of neglect. Sarah ran a trembling hand across the cold, smooth surface, imagining the countless hands that had touched this very space before hers. As they explored the house further, the feeling of unease intensified. Each room held its own unique brand of decay, each corner echoing with the weight of time. Upstairs, the bedrooms were dark and cramped, their walls adorned with peeling wallpaper and stained carpets. In the master bedroom, a large mirror hung on the wall, its surface clouded with age, reflecting only distorted images of themselves. Sarah stared into its depths, momentarily losing herself in the warped reflection. The whispers intensified, seeming to emanate directly from the mirror, close enough to feel like a breath on her neck. The attic door, located at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway, was locked. Mark easily forced it open, revealing a space filled with the ghosts of forgotten possessions, moth-eaten furniture, crumbling boxes filled with yellowed papers, and a palpable sense of age and disrepair. The air here was colder, heavier, laced with a chilling dampness that seeped into their bones. The whispers were louder here, a constant murmuring that seemed to weave through the dust motes dancing in the faint shafts of light. It sounded like voices, but the words were unintelligible, a chaotic symphony of sounds that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. It felt as though countless unseen eyes were watching them, judging their intrusion into this sacred space. That night, they slept poorly. The house was a labyrinth of unsettling noises, floorboards groaning, pipes creaking, and the ever-present whispers that seeped into their dreams, turning them into a nightmare. Sarah awoke multiple times, heart pounding, convinced she had heard someone moving around the house, but each time, she found only silence, an unsettling, profound silence that was somehow more terrifying than any noise. The silence was broken only by the whispers, persistent and insidious, a constant reminder of the unseen presence that shared their new home. The following days were a series of unnerving discoveries. They found old photographs tucked away in forgotten corners, their subjects staring out with haunted eyes. There were faded diary entries hidden within the walls, filled with cryptic messages and unsettling descriptions of bizarre occurrences. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that this house harbored a history far darker and more complex than they had ever imagined. One afternoon, while clearing out a closet in the basement, Mark stumbled upon a small, leather-bound book. Its pages were filled with a bizarre collection of symbols and diagrams, accompanied by unsettling handwritten notes. Some entries seemed to describe rituals, others spoke of entities that defied rational explanation. The symbols were unlike anything either of them had ever seen, yet they felt strangely familiar, as if they had been etched into their subconscious. A cold dread washed over them, a sense of unease so profound that it left them speechless. The whispers intensified, becoming more focused, more insistent, as if the book itself were amplifying the sounds, drawing them in. As they delved deeper into the mystery of the house, the whispers grew louder, more articulate. They were no longer just a background hum, they became distinct words, phrases, and even whole sentences. The voices were numerous, overlapping, and contradictory, creating a cacophony of sound that made it impossible to distinguish individual speakers. They spoke of tragedies and triumphs, of love and loss, of secrets buried deep within the walls. They spoke of a darkness that lay beneath the surface, a malevolence that permeated the very foundations of the house. The voices were unsettling, the intonations full of sorrow, anger, and a desperate, unending plea to be heard. The house felt alive, a sentient entity that whispered its secrets only to those who would listen. The walls seemed to breathe around them, the floorboards creaked with a sense of foreboding, and the shadows danced and shifted with a life of their own. Every object held a silent story, every corner hinted at a darker truth, and every breath carried the weight of untold memories. They were trapped, not just in the house itself, but in the chilling tapestry of its history. The weight of the whispers pressed down upon them, stifling, suffocating, leaving them constantly on edge, forever listening, ever searching for a clue, a meaning, a way out of the increasingly suffocating narrative that unfolded around them, night after night, whisper after whisper, the house never silent, never still, always watching, always listening, always waiting. The terrifying truth was dawning on them. This was more than just an old house. This was a vessel for something far more ancient, far more powerful. And they were trapped inside. The whispers intensified. They had started subtly, a barely perceptible rustling, like the sound of dry leaves skittering across pavement on a windless day. But now, they were a constant, low hum, a background drone that vibrated through the very floorboards beneath their feet. It wasn't a singular voice, but a chorus, a multitude of murmurs overlapping and intertwining, creating a chaotic symphony of unintelligible sound. At first, Sarah dismissed it as the house settling, the groaning of old timbers adjusting to the changing weather. Mark, ever the pragmatist, attributed it to the faulty plumbing or perhaps even the wind whistling through unseen cracks in the aged walls. But as the days bled into nights, and the murmurs persisted, their explanations lost their persuasive power. The sounds were too consistent, too deliberate. They felt intentional. The murmurs weren't just sounds, they were a presence. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, weaving through the cracks in the plaster, seeping from the spaces between the floorboards. They felt them in the air, a palpable weight pressing down on them, a chilling sensation that prickled their skin and sent shivers down their spines. It was as if the house itself was whispering its secrets, revealing a dark history veiled in the layers of dust and decay. One evening, while attempting to read in the living room, Sarah found herself completely overwhelmed. The murmurs had grown louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the rhythm of her heartbeat. Each word, or rather, each fragment of a word, was laced with an emotion so raw, so potent, that it brought tears to her eyes. She couldn't understand what was being said, but she felt the despair, the anguish, the sheer, unadulterated terror that resonated from the walls. It felt like a collective scream, muffled and distorted by time and decay, yet still vibrantly painful. Mark, noticing her distress, switched off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The murmurs seemed to amplify in the absence of light, becoming closer, more intimate. He took her hand, his own trembling slightly. They sat in silence, listening to the cacophony of whispers, the unnerving symphony that now permeated every aspect of their lives. The next day, they attempted to pinpoint the source of the sounds. They tapped on the walls, listening for hollow spaces, searching for evidence of hidden rooms or passages. They explored the attic again, their movements careful and deliberate, every creak and groan of the old house echoing their apprehension. They found nothing. The murmurs seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once, a spectral chorus emanating from the very essence of the house. As days turned into weeks, the murmurs began to shift. They no longer sounded simply unintelligible. They started to take on a strange cadence, a rhythm that resembled a language, though one they couldn't decipher. There were patterns, repetitions, and sequences that suggested a deeper structure to the whispers. It was as if the house was trying to communicate something, to tell them a story, a dark and twisted narrative woven into the very fabric of its being. They sought help, first from neighbors, then from local historians and paranormal investigators. The neighbors had their own tales of unsettling occurrences, whispers of strange happenings and unexplained phenomena connected to the house. The historians unearthed documents detailing the house's long and turbulent history, a chronicle of death, despair, and unexplained disappearances. The paranormal investigators, armed with their EMF readers and infrared cameras, found nothing concrete, yet their discomfort was palpable. They felt the presence, the weight of the whispers, just as intensely as Sarah and Mark. They delved deeper into the house's history, piecing together fragments of information from old newspapers, faded letters, and the cryptic diary entries they had previously discovered. They learned of a family who had lived in the house centuries ago, a family plagued by tragedy and secrets. They learned of a hidden room, a secret passage, a forgotten well, all alluded to in the various documents they found, but none of these physical locations matched the pervasive nature of the whispers. One night, Sarah awoke to a chilling realization. She understood a single phrase from the whispers. It was a word, repeated over and over, a word uttered in a language long lost to time, a word that sent a wave of icy terror through her: leave. The command hung in the air, heavier than the silence that preceded it, more potent than the sounds that followed. It was a warning, a threat, an expulsion. It was clear, the house didn't want them there. It had spoken, finally, and the message was unmistakable. The next morning, they packed their belongings. The murmurs continued, even as they loaded their car. They were a constant, unsettling reminder of the darkness they were escaping, the weight of untold stories and unfathomable secrets they were leaving behind. As they drove away, the house loomed in their rearview mirror, a silent, gray monolith against the horizon. They could almost hear the whispers fading into the distance, a lingering echo of a past they would never fully understand. But even as they left, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the whispers, though faint now, would forever linger in the corners of their minds, a chilling testament to the secrets held within the whispering walls. The unsettling feeling of being constantly observed followed them, a persistent unease, a constant listening for something that might never come again. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers, empty and heavy, filled with the memory of unintelligible murmurs and the chilling truth that some doors are best left unopened, some histories best left undisturbed. The house remained, a silent sentinel on the hill, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to stumble upon its secrets, to become trapped within its whispering walls, and to listen, to truly listen, to the words that are never truly understood. The whispers, once a chaotic jumble of unintelligible sounds, began to coalesce. It was a gradual process, like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom, the image slowly emerging from the fog. One evening, while Mark was attempting to repair a loose floorboard in the hallway, he heard a distinct word amidst the murmur, a word that sliced through the background noise with chilling clarity. It was blood. He froze, his hand suspended midair. The hammer slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the wooden floor. The word echoed in his ears, vibrating with a sickening resonance. It wasn't just a word, it was a stain, a crimson blotch spreading across the fabric of the house's history. Sarah, alerted by the sudden silence, rushed into the hallway. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark, his face pale, could only point to the floorboard. The whispers intensified around them, focusing on the spot where the hammer had fallen. They felt a cold draft, a chilling breath that seemed to emanate from the floor itself. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic tang of blood, a phantom scent that clung to the back of their throats. It was the smell of old blood, dried and caked, mixed with the musty odor of decay and damp earth. Over the next few days, the whispers became increasingly coherent. Words, phrases, even short sentences, began to emerge from the cacophony. They were fragments of conversations, snatches of screams, whispers of sorrow and terror. They pieced together snippets of a story, a horrific narrative woven into the very fabric of the house. They learned of a family, the Millers, who had lived in the house generations ago. A wealthy family, they appeared outwardly successful, but their lives were shadowed by a dark secret. The whispers spoke of a young girl, Eliza Miller, who vanished without a trace. The words painted a picture of a dysfunctional family, rife with secrets and violence. They spoke of arguments, of beatings, of a father consumed by anger and a mother consumed by despair. The whispers described Eliza as a quiet child, often overlooked and neglected, a lost soul wandering the halls of a house that had become her prison. The murmurs described the events of a stormy night, a night filled with fear and screams. The words conjured images of a struggle, a desperate fight, followed by a chilling silence. Then, the word well repeated over and over. It was clear, a chillingly precise description of how Eliza Miller disappeared, how she was hidden, forever silenced. Armed with this new knowledge, Sarah and Mark revisited the historical documents they had previously uncovered. They found references to the Millers, to their outward prosperity masking a deep-seated unhappiness. They discovered legal records, hinting at a possible cover-up, a hushed investigation that went nowhere. An old photograph showed the Miller family. The parents' faces were grim, strained. Eliza's small face, barely visible, held an almost imperceptible look of dread. They decided to investigate the well. The old maps mentioned an abandoned well somewhere on the property, long since covered over and forgotten. The location was vague. The whispers offered only cryptic clues, leading them on a tortuous path through overgrown bushes and tangled vines. After hours of searching, they found it, a crumbling stone structure half buried under the earth. The well was capped, but the stone was loose. With a surge of apprehension, Mark cautiously removed the cover. A sudden chill rushed from the depths, carrying with it the stench of decay and damp earth, and, even more disturbingly, the lingering scent of blood. Using a flashlight, they peered into the darkness. The shaft was deep, its bottom lost in shadow. Then, they heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, rising from the depths of the well, a word that echoed the whispers from the walls, help. The word hung in the air, a desperate plea from a long-forgotten past. They felt an overwhelming compulsion to help, to save the lost soul trapped within the darkness. But what if it was too late? What if the darkness itself had become the soul? The discovery left them shaken. The house was no longer just a house, it was a tomb, a repository of forgotten horrors. The whispers continued, a relentless torrent of secrets, revelations, and warnings. They learned more about the events surrounding Eliza's disappearance. They learned that the house had witnessed unspeakable acts, that its walls had absorbed the pain, the anguish, and the terror of generations. The whispers weren't just sounds, they were the echoes of trauma, the lingering cries of the lost and the forgotten. They were the house's memories, its tormented past bleeding into the present, attempting to communicate, to share its burden. They spoke of a desperate struggle, of a silenced scream, and of a child's last, heartbroken plea for help. The whispering walls had become a spectral testament to a life tragically cut short, and the house's dark history, forever imprinted on its very structure, continued to bleed into the present. They spent weeks painstakingly piecing together the fragmented story, desperately trying to make sense of the horrors they had uncovered. The more they learned, the more terrifying the truth became. The house wasn't simply haunted, it was a living entity, a repository of pain and sorrow, its walls imbued with the echoes of past atrocities, forever whispering their secrets to those who dared to listen. The house had a history far darker, more complex, and far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. The whispers weren't just a haunting, they were a curse, a malevolent force tied inextricably to the land, the house, and the forgotten well. The more they understood, the more trapped they felt, not just by the house, but by the terrible weight of its untold history, a history that threatened to consume them entirely. They realized they were dealing with something beyond their comprehension, something that defied explanation, something that demanded more than just an escape. It demanded understanding, reconciliation, perhaps even atonement. And that knowledge brought them to a new, terrifying realization. They couldn't simply leave. They had to confront the darkness within the whispering walls, or risk becoming yet another echo in the house's endless symphony of sorrow. The silence, the darkness of the unknown, was more frightening than the whispers. The escape, the leaving, was now impossible. They had opened a door that couldn't be closed. The whispers intensified, weaving a tapestry of terror far more intricate than they had initially imagined. No longer were they fragmented words and phrases. The narrative became chillingly clear, a story of violence and betrayal unfolding within the confines of their seemingly idyllic home. The narrative centered around the Miller family, their opulent facade masking a horrifying truth. The whispers spoke of a patriarch, Silas Miller, a man whose wealth was matched only by his volatile temper. He ruled his household with an iron fist, his rage a constant shadow looming over his wife, Eleanor, and their daughter, Eliza. Eleanor, trapped in a gilded cage of despair, became a silent witness to the escalating abuse. The whispers painted a picture of a woman broken by years of subjugation, her spirit crushed under the weight of Silas's tyranny. Her pleas for help were lost in the echoing halls, swallowed by the very walls that now seemed to reverberate with her silent screams. Eliza, a child of barely 10, became the silent observer of her parents' fractured existence, her innocent eyes bearing witness to scenes no child should ever endure. The whispers described specific incidents, painting vivid, horrifying scenes. A shattered porcelain doll, a testament to Silas's fury, lay scattered across the nursery floor. A blood-stained diary, hidden within a secret compartment in Eleanor's wardrobe, detailing years of physical and emotional torment, remained a ghastly testament to the brutal reality behind the Miller family's seemingly perfect life. The diary entries described increasing desperation, failed attempts to escape, and the growing fear that consumed Eleanor. Then came the night of the storm. The whispers intensified, the volume rising to a crescendo of terror. The wind howled outside, mirroring the storm raging within the Miller household. The whispers described a violent argument, fueled by alcohol and rage. Silas's voice, thick with fury, echoed through the house, interspersed with Eleanor's desperate pleas for mercy. The sound of shattering glass, the thud of blows, the terrified cries of Eliza, all woven into the unsettling narrative that poured from the walls. The whispers then fell silent, replaced by a chilling emptiness. The storm raged on, but inside the house, a suffocating stillness settled. This silence, more terrifying than the preceding chaos, hinted at a terrible deed, a finality that chilled Mark and Sarah to the bone. It was in this silence that the true horror of Eliza's disappearance became clear. The whispers revealed the truth. Silas, in a fit of rage, had killed Eleanor. The subsequent narrative suggested Eliza, witnessing the horrifying act, had attempted to escape. Her small body, her childish steps, echoed in the whispers, a frantic dash for freedom. She stumbled into the darkness, her cries lost in the fury of the storm, her desperate pleas muffled by the wind and rain. The whispers led Mark and Sarah to a hidden passage behind a loose stone in the fireplace. Inside, they found a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside the box was a collection of letters and a single faded photograph. The letters, written by Eleanor, described her growing fear, her desperate attempts to protect Eliza, and her plan to escape with her daughter. The photograph showed a happier time, a family portrait before the darkness consumed them. Eliza's bright eyes were striking, a stark contrast to the grim expressions of her parents. The whispers continued, guiding them toward the well. The previous night's discovery of the help whisper was no isolated incident. They now heard the complete sentence, a chilling testament to Eliza's final moments. "Help me, they hurt me, the well." The whispers repeated, each word imbued with a child's terror, a plea for rescue echoing through the decades. The well was more than just a hiding place, it was a tomb, a silent witness to a horrific crime. The whispers now revealed a gruesome detail. Eliza, still alive when thrown into the well, had survived for several days before succumbing to her injuries and starvation, her dying breaths a desperate, unanswered call for help. The house itself seemed to writhe with the weight of its secrets. The very structure, the wood, the plaster, the stone, seemed to vibrate with the residual energy of the past, a tangible manifestation of the trauma it had absorbed. Mark and Sarah found themselves unable to escape the house's grip, their minds consumed by the horrific reality unfolding before them. They were no longer just investigating a haunted house, they were bearing witness to a crime that had haunted the house and its inhabitants for generations. The weight of the Miller family's tragedy settled heavily on them. The whispered secrets were not mere sounds, they were cries for justice, a desperate plea for closure. The narrative expanded, revealing more about the aftermath of the tragedy. The whispers described a hastily arranged cover-up, a hushed investigation, and a family secret buried deep beneath layers of deceit and wealth. Silas, after disposing of Eliza, had maintained a facade of normalcy, continuing his life as if nothing had occurred. The whispers described the desperate attempts by Eleanor's family to uncover the truth, their efforts stifled by Silas's influence and wealth. Their pleas were ignored, their suspicions dismissed as mere gossip. The justice system, blinded by Silas's power and wealth, failed to deliver justice for Eleanor and Eliza. Their voices were silenced, their stories forgotten, their suffering left to haunt the house, its walls bearing the silent testament to a tragic injustice. The whispers, though terrifying, held a strange kind of comfort. They were a form of communication, a way for the lost souls to finally be heard. Mark and Sarah realized that their role was not simply to investigate, it was to bear witness, to amplify the silent screams of the past, to bring the truth to light. They were not just investigators, they became the voices of the voiceless. Their investigation went beyond the house. They delved into historical records, newspaper archives, and old legal documents, piecing together the fragmented story. They discovered details that corroborated the whispers, confirming the chilling accuracy of the house's spectral narrative. They unearthed court documents detailing Silas's violent outbursts and Eleanor's attempts to gain legal protection. They found newspaper clippings mentioning a missing person investigation that had been abruptly closed, a clear indication of a cover-up. This wasn't just a story of ghosts and hauntings, it was a chilling true crime mystery, obscured by time and wealth but now, eerily, revealed by the house itself. Mark and Sarah's investigation revealed a complex web of deceit, silence, and complicity that extended beyond the walls of the house, into the community, and even possibly, to the authorities of the time. As they dug deeper, they found themselves trapped in a horrifying cycle. The whispers, initially a source of fear, now felt like a guide, leading them through the labyrinthine corridors of a dark history, a history that demanded justice, demanded closure, demanded that the truth be revealed. They were no longer just residents of the house, but unwitting participants in a century-old tragedy, bound to unravel its horrific secrets and, perhaps, bring peace to its tormented inhabitants. The house's dark history was not just a burden to carry, it was a responsibility to bear, a promise they couldn't break. The whispers, once a terrifying torment, now seemed like a desperate plea, a plea not just for help, but for remembrance. They understood now. They couldn't leave. They had to fight for Eliza, for Eleanor, for the silenced voices echoing within the whispering walls. The battle was far from over. The weight of the Miller family's tragedy pressed down on Mark and Sarah, a suffocating blanket of despair woven from decades of silenced screams. They had unearthed enough evidence to paint a horrifying picture, a tyrannical patriarch, a victimized wife, and a missing child whose fate was chillingly clear. But the whispers continued, leading them deeper into the house's labyrinthine history, revealing more than just the crime itself. They revealed a conspiracy of silence, a web of complicity that extended far beyond the crumbling walls of the old manor. Their investigation took them to the local historical society, a dusty repository of forgotten tales and yellowed newspaper clippings. Hours were spent poring over microfiche, searching for any mention of the Miller family, any hint of the tragedy they now knew had occurred. They found scattered references: Silas Miller, a successful businessman, his sudden death attributed to a heart attack, his wife, Eleanor, a recluse who died unexpectedly a few years later. There was no mention of Eliza, her disappearance swallowed by the silence that had cloaked the family's dark secret for so long. The local librarian, an elderly woman with eyes that held the weight of countless untold stories, offered a cryptic piece of information. She remembered whispers, not the spectral whispers of the house, but the hushed murmurs of the town itself, hinting at a darker side to the Miller family's opulence. She spoke of rumors, of hushed conversations in dimly lit parlors, of a missing child whose story had been deliberately buried. She mentioned a local constable, a man named Sheriff Hayes, who had been known to turn a blind eye to certain discrepancies, especially when those involved were affluent members of the community. Mark and Sarah's investigation led them to Sheriff Hayes' descendants, a sprawling family still entrenched in the local power structure. They were initially reluctant to speak, but under persistent questioning, a hesitant granddaughter revealed a hidden family history, one that corroborated the house's whispered narrative. Sheriff Hayes, it turned out, had been paid handsomely by Silas Miller to bury the investigation into Eliza's disappearance. The documents detailing his corrupt practices were long gone, destroyed, she claimed, by Silas himself before his death. The family legacy was one of silence, complicity, and a painful awareness of a truth they had been instructed to never reveal. The whispers intensified as they pieced together the fragments of the truth. They learned that Silas's wealth had bought him immunity, his power silencing any who dared to question him. The local newspapers, beholden to his advertising dollars, had omitted any mention of the missing child, presenting a carefully crafted image of a successful businessman and grieving widower. The community, intimidated by Silas's influence, had turned a blind eye to the tragedy unfolding within the walls of his mansion. The silence had become a collective burden, a dark secret shared by a whole town. The couple found themselves in a race against time, not just to solve a decades-old mystery, but to confront the ghost of Silas Miller himself. The whispers were no longer guiding them, they were pushing them, urging them to confront the past before it consumed them. The house seemed to react to their investigations, the whispers becoming more insistent, more menacing as they got closer to uncovering the truth. The temperature in the house would fluctuate wildly, icy drafts sweeping through even on the warmest days, and inexplicable shadows danced in the corners of their eyes. One night, while examining the old family ledger they'd found in the hidden passage, Sarah felt a sudden chill. The air grew heavy, and a faint whisper, sharper and more distinct than before, slithered into her ear, "He's watching." A moment later, a heavy object crashed to the floor in the room above them. They found a large antique mirror shattered, its glass scattered across the floor. The room was otherwise untouched. It was a clear message: they were not alone, and their investigation was jeopardizing someone, or something. Their investigation reached its climax in a terrifying confrontation with a spectral figure in the house's attic. The figure, unmistakably Silas Miller, materialized in the dim light, his eyes burning with an icy rage. He wasn't just a ghost, he was a tangible manifestation of the house's dark energy, his presence a chilling confirmation of the whisper's accuracy. He raged at them, his voice echoing through the attic, a horrifying blend of spectral whispers and tangible fury, accusing them of meddling in affairs that were none of their concern. The confrontation was terrifying but oddly clarifying. Silas's spectral rage wasn't just about protecting his secrets, it was about protecting himself from the consequences of his actions. He was bound to the house, trapped by his guilt and the weight of his crimes. He was a prisoner of his own making, his spectral existence a reflection of his moral bankruptcy. They escaped the attic unscathed, but the experience left them shaken. They had faced the embodiment of the house's darkness, the source of the whisper's malevolence. The spectral encounter served as a catalyst. They took their findings to the local police, presenting a compelling case based on the diary entries, Eleanor's letters, the historical documents, and the evidence of Sheriff Hayes' corruption. The initial skepticism slowly melted away under the weight of their evidence. The police reopened the investigation into Eliza's disappearance, beginning a thorough investigation of Silas Miller's past. They brought the town's long-held secrets into the light, a process that revealed a painful truth about the community's complicity in the cover-up. The whispers did not cease entirely, but their tone shifted. They were no longer filled with terror and rage, but with a subdued sorrow, a sense of release. Mark and Sarah, haunted by the Miller family's tragedy, yet comforted by the revelation of the truth, felt a sense of closure. They had brought Eliza's story into the light, giving a voice to the voiceless. They had confronted the past and, in doing so, had brought a measure of peace to a house haunted by unspeakable horror. The house, once a monument to evil, now seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, its whispers fading to a gentle sigh, the weight of its secrets finally released. They left the house, the burden lifted, but the memory of Eliza's suffering and the fight for justice would remain etched in their hearts forever, a stark reminder that some whispers, though faint, must never be ignored. The lingering unease remained, a testament to the enduring power of the past, but mixed with a profound sense of relief, a hard-won victory in a battle against the silence of history itself. Story 2, The Midnight Visitor. The old cabin groaned under the weight of the wind, a mournful symphony that echoed the emptiness within. Agnes clutched her worn shawl tighter, the chill seeping into her bones despite the crackling fire in the hearth. The flames danced, casting long, flickering shadows that writhed and pulsed like living things across the rough-hewn walls. Outside, the relentless Wyoming wind howled, a banshee wail that clawed at the windows and threatened to tear the aged timbers from their moorings. She was utterly alone, miles from the nearest town, a tiny speck of humanity swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. Agnes had sought solitude, a refuge from the relentless clamor of city life. The cabin, a family heirloom passed down through generations, offered a stark contrast to the frenetic pace of her existence. Initially, the silence had been welcome, a balm to her frayed nerves. She spent her days hiking the surrounding hills, her boots crunching through the crisp snow, her breath misting in the frigid air. The nights, however, were different. The solitude, once a comfort, now felt like a suffocating blanket. The wind's whispers had begun to sound like voices, the creaks and groans of the old cabin taking on a sinister resonance. She tried to ignore it, to attribute the rising unease to simple nerves, to the strangeness of her isolated existence. But the feeling persisted, a low thrum of dread that vibrated beneath the surface of her consciousness. It intensified as night fell, transforming the beautiful, rugged scenery into a menacing, shadowy realm. Tonight, it was particularly bad. The wind had reached a fever pitch, its icy breath rattling the windows like skeletal fingers. Agnes had tried to read, to distract herself with the familiar comfort of a worn novel, but the words blurred, and the printed lines swam before her eyes. She kept glancing at the shadows, at the dark corners of the cabin, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every creak, every groan, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. Then, it started. A faint scratching at the door, like claws scraping against wood. Agnes froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was a subtle sound, easily dismissed as the wind, but something in the rhythm, in the persistence of the scratching, told her otherwise. It wasn't the wind. She sat perfectly still, her eyes wide, her ears straining to pick up any other sound. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and the scratching continued, growing progressively louder, more insistent. A cold sweat slicked her palms. This wasn't just the wind, something was out there. Agnes reached for a heavy iron poker, its cold weight offering a small measure of comfort. She slowly rose from her chair, her muscles tense, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. She crept towards the door, each step heavy and deliberate, her eyes darting from side to side. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by an unnerving silence that felt far more threatening than the previous cacophony. With her hand trembling, she slowly reached for the latch. A wave of nausea washed over her, a primal fear seizing her heart. She could feel the eyes on her, though she knew logically that it was just her imagination. Or was it? Hesitantly, she opened the door a crack. The wind rushed in, icy and unforgiving, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something indefinably off. Something musky, earthy, and faintly metallic. She saw nothing. The porch was empty, the snow undisturbed, the only movement the relentless dance of the wind. She closed the door, her hand shaking so violently that she dropped the poker. It clattered to the floor with a resounding clang that seemed to amplify the silence. Her heart hammered in her chest, her breathing ragged. She leaned against the door, her body trembling, trying to catch her breath, her mind racing with a million terrifying possibilities. The scratching resumed, this time at a window. A high-pitched, frantic scratching that sent shivers down her spine. She spun around, her eyes fixated on the window, the poker lying forgotten on the floor. The scratching was accompanied by a low, guttural growl, barely audible above the wind, but undeniably present. Terror, raw and primal, seized her. She scrambled back, her legs unsteady, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. The growling grew louder, closer, and accompanied by another sound, a rhythmic thudding, like something large and heavy was striking the glass. The window rattled, the old glass groaning under the relentless assault. Agnes backed away, her eyes wide with terror, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. She scrambled towards the fireplace, her only refuge, her only hope. She grabbed the poker again, clutching it tightly in her hand, its cold metal a small comfort against the mounting terror. The window shuddered violently, and then, with a deafening crash, it shattered. The icy wind blasted into the cabin, carrying with it the night's mystery, a palpable sense of darkness and evil. Agnes screamed, a primal cry of terror that was swallowed by the howling wind and the terrifying growl that seemed to fill the cabin. She huddled by the fireplace, her eyes darting around the room, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The darkness seemed to press in on her, the shadows dancing and writhing like living things. The growling continued, closer now, more menacing, and it was accompanied by the sound of something large moving through the snow outside. Agnes didn't know what it was, but she knew one thing: she was in mortal danger. She could only pray that whatever it was outside wouldn't find its way inside before dawn. She huddled there, wrapped in the meager warmth of the fire, a tiny, fragile figure facing the night's terrifying unknown, her solitude shattered, her sense of safety stolen. The night had become a living nightmare. The hours that followed felt like an eternity. The growling and scratching continued intermittently, punctuated by the relentless assault of the wind and the occasional crash of snow against the walls. Agnes didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound, terrified that any noise would attract whatever creature was lurking outside. She listened intently to every creak, every groan, every sigh of the wind, clinging to the embers of the dying fire for both warmth and the illusion of hope. Dawn eventually broke, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, a stark contrast to the night's horrific drama. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the cabin's broken window, Agnes cautiously peeked outside. The snow-covered landscape was pristine, undisturbed, except for the scattered remnants of shattered glass. There was no sign of the creature, no footprints in the snow, nothing to indicate that her terrifying night visitor had ever been there. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the comforting quiet of the previous days. It was a heavy, ominous silence filled with the lingering residue of fear and the unsettling memory of the night's horrors. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt haunted, a place that could never again offer the same sense of peace and solitude. The whispering wind seemed to carry a new, more ominous tone, hinting at something unseen, something lurking just beyond the edge of perception, a constant reminder of the night's terrifying visitor and the fragility of her solitude. The fear, once a fleeting shadow, had now taken root, becoming a permanent fixture in her heart, leaving her wondering if the terrifying experience was just a figment of her imagination or a chilling glimpse into a reality far more disturbing than she could possibly have imagined. The solitude, which she had once sought, now felt less like a refuge and more like a prison. The remaining embers in the hearth cast long, dancing shadows that mimicked the frantic beat of Agnes's heart. The shattered window gaped like a wounded eye, letting in the biting wind that whipped through the cabin, carrying with it the lingering scent of pine and that unsettling metallic tang. The sun, a pale disk rising over the snow-laden peaks, offered little comfort. Its light couldn't quite dispel the lingering darkness that clung to the walls, to the very air itself. She remained huddled by the fireplace, the poker still clutched in her hand, its cold weight a stark contrast to the burning fear that consumed her. The silence, as she had observed, was profoundly different now. It was heavy, pregnant with unspoken dread, a stark departure from the comforting quiet she had initially sought. The wind whispered secrets through the broken window, a sibilant murmur that seemed to carry the echo of guttural growls and frantic scratching. As the daylight strengthened, Agnes ventured to inspect the window more closely. The shattered glass was scattered across the porch, embedded in the thick layer of snow. There were no footprints, no tracks of any kind to indicate what had caused such a violent assault. The snow was untouched, pristine, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. This only heightened her unease. The absence of evidence felt more terrifying than any tangible proof. It was then that she noticed it. A faint, almost imperceptible smear of something dark clung to the window frame, just above the shattered glass. It was dark, almost black, a stain that didn't quite resemble blood, but something else. It had a strange, oily sheen, and as she touched it cautiously with the tip of her finger, a wave of nausea swept over her. The substance felt strangely viscous, almost alive under her touch. It emitted a faint, metallic odor that was stronger than before, acrid and somehow unsettlingly familiar. The sun glinted off the stain, revealing tiny, iridescent particles embedded within its surface, particles that seemed to shimmer and shift, as though alive. Agnes recoiled, a sudden wave of dizziness washing over her. She felt a prickling sensation on her skin, as if unseen eyes were watching her, judging her, waiting. The feeling intensified, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. The hours that followed were spent in a state of heightened anxiety. Agnes couldn't shake the image of the dark stain, the shimmering particles, the nauseating smell. She tried to rationalize the events of the night, to convince herself that it had all been a product of her imagination, fueled by the isolation and the howling wind. But a deep-seated dread remained, a knot of unease that tightened in her chest with every gust of wind that rattled the broken window pane. She tried to contact the outside world, but the old cabin's landline was dead, its connection severed by the storm. Her cell phone had no signal. She was truly alone, stranded in the heart of the Wyoming wilderness, haunted by the memory of unseen eyes, unsettling smells, and the lingering residue of an unknown presence. Later that day, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced and writhed across the cabin floor, Agnes heard a noise. A subtle scraping sound, like fingernails on wood, emanated from the wall near the broken window. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it gradually grew louder, more insistent, as if something were trying to gain entry. Her heart pounded in her chest. The fear, which had subsided somewhat during the day, returned with a vengeance, a cold, paralyzing dread that froze her in place. She held her breath, listening intently, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from within the wall itself, a low, scratching, gnawing sound that sent shivers down her spine. As darkness descended once more, the scraping intensified, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to resonate from the very depths of the cabin. Agnes felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, a sudden awareness that she wasn't alone. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that something was inside the walls, something that was watching her, waiting. Something unseen, something that existed just beyond the edge of perception. She grabbed the poker again, its cold metal offering little comfort against the rising tide of terror. She circled the fireplace, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow, trying to discern the source of the sounds. The growls grew louder, closer, the scraping more frantic, more insistent. It felt as if whatever was inside the walls was growing stronger, more determined to break free. Suddenly, a section of plaster near the window gave way, revealing a gaping hole in the wall. Agnes gasped, stepping back in horror as a shadowy figure began to emerge from the darkness within. It was humanoid in shape, but twisted, distorted, its features obscured by the shadows. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if its limbs were disjointed, its body made of something other than flesh and bone. Agnes stared, mesmerized by horror, as the figure emerged further from the hole. Its skin, if it could be called skin, seemed to shimmer and shift like the particles in the dark stain on the window frame. It had no discernible features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, only an amorphous mass of darkness that pulsed with a strange, internal light. The creature let out a low, guttural moan, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within Agnes's bones. It reached out a long, slender appendage, its touch sending a jolt of icy fear through her. The appendage was not flesh and blood but something far more sinister, almost crystalline in texture, yet as sharp as a shard of glass. Agnes screamed, a primal cry of terror that was swallowed by the darkness. She stumbled backward, knocking over the poker. It clattered to the floor, its sound lost in the creature's chilling moan. She scrambled back, seeking refuge, desperate to escape the creature's horrifying presence. But escape seemed impossible. She was trapped, surrounded by darkness, by the night's terrifying presence. The creature advanced, its movements slow, deliberate, its presence filling the cabin with an overwhelming sense of dread. Its shadowy form seemed to consume the room, swallowing the light, leaving Agnes surrounded by an oppressive darkness that threatened to suffocate her. The creature continued its advance towards Agnes until it stood before her. The air crackled with an unnatural energy. The creature reached out with its appendage, its touch seeming to burn. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the creature vanished, disappearing back into the hole in the wall, leaving Agnes trembling, gasping for breath, bathed in the chilling moonlight filtering through the broken window pane. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the relentless howl of the wind. Agnes never saw the creature again. The hole in the wall remained, a constant reminder of the terrifying encounter, a testament to the night's horrors. But the experience left an indelible mark on her. She eventually returned to the city, leaving behind the haunting memories and the isolated cabin, seeking comfort and solace in the company of other people. However, the isolation that she so craved before remained a significant part of her past, forever tainted with the memory of the night's uninvited guest and the chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of human understanding. The solitude she once embraced now served as a reminder of her vulnerability, a chilling echo of a nightmare that refused to fade. The whispers in the wind, now imbued with a different, more sinister meaning, still haunted her, a constant reminder of the terrifying visitor and a perpetual sense of unease. The silence that followed the creature's disappearance was more terrifying than the creature itself. It wasn't the comforting quiet of the wilderness, but a suffocating void, heavy with the lingering scent of ozone and something else, something indescribably ancient and foul. Agnes lay huddled on the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body trembling uncontrollably. The moonlight, filtering through the shattered window pane, cast long, distorted shadows across the cabin, making every corner and crevice seem to writhe with unseen movement. She couldn't bring herself to move, to even glance towards the gaping hole in the wall. The memory of the creature's touch, icy and burning simultaneously, sent shivers down her spine. It hadn't been a physical touch, not in the conventional sense. It had been more like an intrusion, a violation of her very being, a psychic assault that left her drained and weak. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and touched the jagged edges of the hole in the wall. The plaster was surprisingly cold, even colder than the night air. Her fingers brushed against something slick and viscous, a residue similar to the dark stain she'd found on the window frame. The metallic tang was even stronger here, assaulting her nostrils with its sharp, acrid odor. It was the smell of fear, of terror, of something ancient and deeply unsettling. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the broken window, casting a pale, uncertain light across the cabin, Agnes finally mustered the strength to stand. She moved stiffly, her muscles aching, her mind still reeling from the events of the night. The hole in the wall remained a gaping maw, a testament to the terror she had endured. But there was no trace of the creature, no sign of its passage other than the lingering smell and the viscous, oily residue. She spent the remainder of the morning cleaning the cabin, a mindless task that helped to distract her from the lingering horror. She swept the shattered glass from the porch, careful to avoid the dark stain on the window frame. She patched the hole in the wall as best she could, using scraps of wood and plaster, trying to seal away the memory of the night's terror. But the memory refused to be contained. It clung to her like the lingering scent of the creature, a persistent reminder of her vulnerability, of the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind, sent a fresh wave of fear washing over her. As the day wore on, the fear gradually gave way to a different emotion, a profound sense of isolation, a chilling realization of her utter aloneness. The landline remained dead, her cell phone was useless. She was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in the heart of the Wyoming wilderness with only the haunting memory of the night's visitor to keep her company. The afternoon brought a fresh snowfall, blanketing the cabin in a thick layer of white. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now, a silence that hummed with a subtle, unsettling energy. Agnes found herself drawn to the window, her eyes fixed on the pristine expanse of snow. There were no tracks, no signs of any disturbance. The snow was undisturbed, immaculate, a stark contrast to the chaos within the cabin. As dusk approached, the air grew heavy, the silence thickening, pregnant with unspoken dread. The wind howled outside, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the terror within her. She found herself staring at the hole she'd patched in the wall, wondering if she'd truly sealed away the threat, if the creature might somehow return. The night was long and torturous. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak and groan of the old cabin sounded like the approaching footsteps of the creature. She spent most of the night huddled by the fireplace, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow, listening intently for any sound that might betray the creature's presence. The fear was a constant companion, a cold, clammy hand resting on her heart. The next morning brought a glimmer of hope. The storm had subsided, the wind had died down. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the snow-covered landscape. Agnes ventured outside, breathing in the crisp, clean air. The cabin seemed smaller, more vulnerable now, stripped bare of its previous isolation. As she stood surveying the landscape, she noticed something new. A single, perfectly formed footprint in the snow, just beyond the porch. It was too large for any animal she knew, too deep, too perfectly formed. It was humanoid, but not human. The print was long and slender, almost too elegant for its size, with a strangely distorted heel. The footprint triggered a wave of icy fear that washed over her, stronger and more intense than anything she'd experienced before. It wasn't the fear of the creature itself, but the chilling certainty that it hadn't truly been gone. It had been watching, waiting, and now it had left its mark, a silent testament to its continued presence. The experience changed Agnes profoundly. The solitude she once craved had been shattered, replaced by a deep-seated fear and an unshakable sense of vulnerability. She left the cabin soon after, returning to the city, seeking the comfort and companionship she'd previously shunned. But the isolation remained, forever tainted by the memories of the night's horrors. The whispers in the wind, once a source of comfort, now carried the chilling echo of the creature's presence, a constant reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of human understanding. Years later, Agnes would still occasionally hear the scraping sound in the quiet of her city apartment, a phantom echo from the Wyoming wilderness. And sometimes, on cold, windswept nights, she would catch a whiff of that metallic scent, that acrid odor of fear, and the hairs on her arms would stand on end. A chilling reminder of the terrifying presence that had visited her lonely cabin. The memory of the creature, its strange elegance, its terrifying stillness, its chilling ability to violate her essence without touching her physically, remained a constant reminder, a haunting testament to the night her solitude was forever shattered, and she was left to grapple with the reality that some things are better left undisturbed, better left unknown. The dark stain on her memory, much like the oily substance she discovered in the cabin, shimmered and shifted, refusing to fade, a perpetual testament to her nightmarish encounter. The initial wave of terror had subsided, replaced by a cold, calculating dread. Agnes knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she wasn't alone. The creature hadn't simply vanished, it had retreated, biding its time, waiting for another opportunity to strike. The pristine snow, untouched save for that single, unnerving footprint, was a mockery of her naive hope for escape. It was a message, a chilling promise of its return. She spent the rest of the day in a feverish state of preparation. She barricaded the cabin door with everything she could find, a heavy oak table, chairs, even the remnants of the broken furniture. She piled snow against the door, creating a makeshift barrier against any potential intrusion. The hole in the wall, patched haphazardly, remained a source of constant anxiety. She considered boarding it up completely, but a perverse sense of dread held her back. It felt as if closing that hole would somehow invite the creature back with a vengeance. As darkness descended, the wind picked up, howling through the cracks in the cabin's aging timbers like a mournful banshee. The temperature plummeted, and the cabin groaned under the strain of the biting wind and the weight of the accumulating snow. Agnes huddled by the fireplace, the flames flickering like nervous eyes in the gloom, their warmth doing little to dispel the icy fear that gripped her heart. The first attack came subtly, almost imperceptibly. A low hum, barely audible above the wind's howl, began to resonate through the cabin. It vibrated through the floor, up her legs, settling in her bones with a bone-deep chill. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, but more of a sensation, a pressure, a feeling of being watched, of being probed, of being measured. The humming intensified, growing louder, more insistent. The cabin seemed to vibrate, to pulsate with the unseen energy. Agnes clutched the heavy poker, her knuckles white, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt a prickling sensation on her skin, as if unseen fingers were tracing her body, feeling her out, testing her defenses. The air grew thick, heavy with an oppressive energy, a tangible sense of malice. Suddenly, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the humming itself. It was a silence pregnant with anticipation, a silence that screamed of impending doom. The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming almost unbearable. Agnes knew, with absolute certainty, that the creature was close, that it was circling, testing her resolve. Then it began. A series of scraping sounds, slow and deliberate, emanated from the wall near the hole Agnes had patched. The sounds were agonizingly slow, each scrape sending a fresh wave of icy fear washing over her. It sounded like claws, long, sharp claws, dragging across the wood, testing its strength. The sounds were close, too close. She could almost feel the creature's presence on the other side, its icy breath against the wood. Agnes held her breath, straining to hear any other sound, any indication of the creature's movements. The scraping continued, growing more frantic, more insistent. The wood creaked and groaned under the pressure, the patched hole beginning to buckle and give way. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at her throat, threatening to choke her. With a final, splintering crack, the wood gave way. A jagged hole appeared in the wall, significantly larger than before. Agnes braced herself, her eyes glued to the hole, her grip tightening on the poker. She waited, her senses straining, her mind racing. Slowly, deliberately, something emerged from the darkness beyond the hole. It wasn't a physical form, not in the conventional sense. It was more like a distortion in the air, a ripple in the fabric of reality, a swirling vortex of shadows and darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, an eerie elegance that somehow intensified the terror. It pulsed with a cold, malevolent energy, an aura of ancient evil that seeped into the very air around it. Agnes felt the same psychic assault as before, but this time, it was far more intense, far more invasive. It wasn't just a probing, it was a violation, a deliberate attempt to break her, to shatter her will. She gasped, her mind reeling, her body racked with pain. She felt herself weakening, succumbing to the creature's overwhelming presence. But something inside her snapped. The terror, the fear, fueled a surge of adrenaline, a desperate surge of defiance. She screamed, a raw, primal scream that echoed through the cabin, a cry of defiance against the encroaching darkness. She swung the poker, her attack wildly desperate, but strangely accurate. The poker struck the vortex of shadows, not with a solid clang, but with a dissonant screech of tortured energy. The vortex recoiled, momentarily stunned, its shape flickering and distorting. The scraping ceased. The chilling hum faded. The oppressive pressure eased. The creature, whatever it was, retreated. The shadows retracted into the hole, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The silence returned, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of relief, tinged with exhaustion and a profound sense of lingering unease. Agnes collapsed to the floor, trembling, her body drenched in sweat, her mind reeling. She had survived, but the encounter had left its mark. The lingering psychic assault left her drained and weak. The smell of ozone and that ancient, foul odor still clung to the air, a constant reminder of the night's terror. She didn't sleep that night, or the next. She stayed by the fire, clutching the poker, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The hole in the wall remained, a gaping maw in her defense, a testament to the terrifying encounter. But the creature hadn't returned. Not yet. The experience left her profoundly changed. The idyllic solitude she once sought was forever tainted, replaced by a deep-seated fear and a haunting awareness of unseen horrors. She understood now, with terrifying clarity, that some things are better left undisturbed, better left unknown. The whispers in the wind carried a new meaning, a chilling reminder of the terrifying presence that had dared to violate her solitude, a testament to the night when her peace was shattered, and the reality of the unknown was brutally revealed. The memories, like the dark stain on the window, would forever cling to her, a perpetual reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked in the shadows, just beyond the edge of human perception. The sunrise, when it finally arrived, was a weak, watery thing, struggling to penetrate the thick blanket of snow that had fallen during the night. Agnes watched it from her vantage point by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The cabin, usually a haven of peace, now felt like a prison, its timbers groaning under the weight of the snow and the burden of her memories. The hole in the wall, a jagged tear in the fabric of her sanctuary, was a constant, gnawing reminder of the night's horrors. The lingering smell of ozone hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of something ancient and foul, a scent that clung to the back of her throat, a phantom taste of fear. She could still feel the phantom touch of the creature, the invasive psychic probe that had threatened to shatter her mind. Even the silence felt wrong, heavy with the unspoken weight of the unseen. The psychological impact was as profound as the physical exhaustion that weighed her down. She tried to eat, but the food felt like ash in her mouth. She tried to drink, but the water tasted metallic, contaminated by the lingering dread. Sleep was impossible, every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the cabin's timbers sounded like the approach of unseen claws. She spent the day in a daze, moving mechanically, tending the fire, replenishing the dwindling supply of wood, but her mind remained trapped in the vortex of the previous night's terror. The mental images replayed themselves relentlessly, a horrifying film loop of swirling shadows, the piercing psychic assault, the desperate swing of the poker, the dissonant screech of tortured energy. The creature, whatever it was, had retreated, but its essence remained, a chilling presence that permeated the very fabric of her being. It was a violation that went beyond the physical. It was an invasion of her soul, a defilement of her sanctuary. Days bled into weeks. The snow continued to fall, isolating her further, cutting her off from the world. The only sounds were the howl of the wind, the creak of the cabin, and the relentless ticking of a small, battered clock on the mantelpiece. The clock seemed to mock her with its steady rhythm, a relentless reminder of the passage of time, a time that seemed to stretch and distort, echoing the strange distortions she'd witnessed the night of the attack. She attempted to patch the hole in the wall, but her hands trembled, her movements hesitant and unsure. Each nail she hammered was a painful reminder of the creature's presence, of the vulnerability it had exposed. The patch was a crude, imperfect repair, mirroring the damage inflicted on her soul. The patched area was a visible scar on her life, the raw wood a visual representation of the traumatic night. She noticed a subtle shift in the temperature gradient near the repaired section of the wall. It felt noticeably colder, a persistent reminder of the otherworldly energies that had emanated from beyond the hole. The isolation deepened, feeding her growing paranoia. Every shadow held a potential threat, every rustle of the wind carried a whispered warning. She started to see things, flickering movements in the periphery of her vision, faint whispers in the wind that seemed to address her by name. She would jump at the slightest sound, her heart pounding against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. The line between reality and delusion started to blur. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the snow-covered landscape, Agnes heard it again. The low hum, barely perceptible at first, began to resonate through the cabin, vibrating through the floor, up her legs, settling in her bones with the same bone-chilling intensity as before. She froze, her breath caught in her throat, every muscle tense, every cell vibrating with fear. The humming grew louder, more insistent, building to a crescendo that threatened to shatter the silence. The cabin seemed to pulse with unseen energy, a tangible manifestation of the creature's return. Agnes clutched the poker, its cold metal a small comfort against the wave of terror that washed over her. She felt the familiar prickling sensation on her skin, the unseen fingers tracing her body, measuring her, testing her. This time, however, the assault was different. It was more subtle, more insidious. Instead of direct psychic pain, she experienced a subtle manipulation, a twisting of her thoughts and emotions, a gradual erosion of her will. She felt herself drifting, losing her grip on reality, succumbing to the creature's hypnotic influence. Her memories, her identity, her very sense of self began to unravel. She fought back, desperately clinging to the vestiges of her sanity, her mind battling the creature's insidious influence. She focused on the flickering flames of the fire, on the steady ticking of the clock, on anything that anchored her to reality. She whispered to herself, repeating affirmations, clinging to her name, to her identity, to her will. The struggle was exhausting, draining her of her remaining strength. Her mind felt stretched thin, on the verge of snapping. But she held on, refusing to surrender, driven by a desperate will to survive, a primal instinct to fight for her own sanity, her own existence. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock. The oppressive pressure eased, the insidious manipulation ceased, the psychic assault subsided. But the lingering sense of unease, the subtle distortion of reality, remained. Agnes sat there, trembling, exhausted, her mind reeling. She didn't know if the creature had truly gone, or if it was merely biding its time, patiently waiting for another opportunity to strike. The hole in the wall remained, a gaping wound in her sanctuary, a constant reminder of the night's terrors and the lingering fear that shadowed every waking moment. The experience had changed her forever. The idyllic solitude she once cherished was irrevocably tainted, replaced by a constant sense of unease, a haunting awareness of unseen horrors. The whispers in the wind now carried a different meaning, a chilling reminder of the unseen presence that had violated her peace, that had shattered her sense of security, and had left an indelible mark on her soul. She knew she could never truly escape the memories, the lingering psychic scars, the chilling knowledge that she had glimpsed into a realm of existence beyond human comprehension. The unsettling encounter became a constant companion, an unwelcome guest that resided within the walls of her mind. And every night, as she huddled by the fire, she would listen, always listening, for the faintest hint of the low hum, a sound that promised the return of the midnight visitor. The aftermath would forever haunt her, a constant reminder that some doors are best left unopened, and some whispers best left unheard. The darkness had come, and it had left its mark, forever altering the fabric of her existence. Her refuge, once a sanctuary of peace and solitude, was now permanently marked by the insidious tendrils of the paranormal, a chilling testament to the night the unseen broke through. And the question remained, forever unanswered, was it truly gone, or merely waiting for its chance to return? The whispers continued, now a constant, chilling undercurrent to her life, a stark reminder of the night she stared into the abyss, and the abyss stared back. Story 3, The Cry in the Night. The cry sliced through the stillness of the night, a sound so raw and primal it ripped Agnes from sleep. It wasn't a human cry, not the kind she'd heard before, the kind born of pain or fear. This was different, something ancient and unsettling, resonating with a chilling, otherworldly quality that sent shivers down her spine. It echoed through the quiet cabin, vibrating in the very timbers, a sound that seemed to burrow into her bones, settling deep within her marrow. She sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. The flickering firelight danced across the walls, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed and pulsed like living things. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the same oppressive weight she'd felt during the creature's previous visit, a tangible manifestation of unseen horror. The cry came again, closer this time, laced with a desperate, agonized quality that seemed to claw at the edges of her sanity. It was a sound that spoke of profound suffering, of a terrible torment beyond human comprehension. It was a sound that pierced the veil of reality, pulling her into a realm of shadows and whispered terrors. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped her. She glanced at the repaired hole in the wall, the crude patch a stark reminder of the nightmarish encounter that had shattered her peace. The cold seeped from the patched area, a bone-chilling chill that seemed to emanate from beyond the wall, a constant, subtle reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond the confines of her cabin. She grabbed the poker, its cold metal offering little comfort against the escalating dread that choked her. The sound was relentless, a tormenting symphony of suffering that played on her raw nerves, driving her to the edge of madness. It was a symphony of fear, expertly composed and executed to induce maximum terror. The sound was hypnotic, almost paralyzing her with fear. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to flee, to hide, but an icy paralysis gripped her, freezing her to the spot. This cry, unlike the hum from before, was laced with a profound sense of despair, of utter hopelessness. It was a desperate plea, a cry for help that seemed to reach across dimensions, a cry that resonated with a haunting familiarity, triggering deep-seated anxieties within her soul. This was not merely a sound, it was an assault on her psyche. It resonated not only in her ears, but also in her heart, and even deeper still, in the recesses of her soul where memories she didn't understand clawed at the surface of her awareness. Agnes cautiously approached the window, peering out into the inky blackness. The snow-covered landscape was a sea of white under the pale moonlight, the trees standing stark and silent against the night sky. The silence itself was chilling, broken only by the haunting cry that seemed to emanate from the heart of the woods, a sound that somehow seemed to defy the distance, wrapping itself around the cabin like a shroud. The cry intensified, closer now, closer than before. It was impossible to pinpoint its source, yet it felt as though it was all around her, echoing in the very air she breathed, a nightmarish symphony of dread. It was not just sound, it was a palpable presence, a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into the very fabric of existence. Its intensity increased, making it difficult for her to hold onto her sanity. The feeling was reminiscent of when she first encountered the entity. A wave of nausea washed over her, and she stumbled back from the window, clutching at the wall for support. Her vision swam, and a ringing sound began to fill her ears, mixing with the agonizing cry that seemed to tear the world apart. It was a sound that resonated in her very bones, in the marrow of her being, a sound that spoke of ultimate torment, of a despair so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. The sound intensified, shifting in pitch and tone, growing closer with each passing moment. It changed from a cry to a scream, then to a chilling wail, the sound tearing apart the very fabric of night. She felt herself weakening, her resistance crumbling in the face of the terror that emanated from the woods. The cabin itself seemed to shudder, its timbers groaning under the weight of the unseen horror that pressed against its walls. She pressed her hands against the cold glass, willing herself to stay strong, to remain grounded amidst the escalating terror. But the sound was relentless, an invasion of her senses, a brutal assault on her sanity. It was a sound that broke through the confines of the physical world, a piercing scream from beyond the veil of reality, a nightmarish symphony of dread and anguish. Then, as suddenly as it began, the cry ceased. A profound silence followed, heavier, more oppressive than the sounds that had preceded it. The silence itself seemed to hum with unseen energy, vibrating in the air, in the cabin's timbers, in her very bones. She was left shaking, breathless, her mind reeling from the sheer force of the auditory assault. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, a profound fatigue that went beyond physical tiredness. She was drained, emotionally and mentally depleted, as if the cry had not just assaulted her ears, but had also sucked the life out of her. The lingering silence stretched on, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the frantic beating of her own heart, a drumbeat of fear. Agnes stood there for a long time, unable to move, unable to think, utterly paralyzed by the chilling experience. The silence was a stark contrast to the agonizing cry, and it held an even greater sense of foreboding, a palpable feeling of dread that clung to her like a shroud. She didn't know what had made that sound, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that it was something terrifying. Something that existed outside of the normal boundaries of reality. Something that had touched her, shaken her to her core, and left her with a profound sense of dread and unease. The feeling was even worse than after the attack. The night was far from over. The woods remained silent, yet the silence was more terrifying than the cries. Agnes knew the creatures were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. The cold from the patched area grew colder. The night held its breath. And Agnes, haunted by the chilling cry, waited too. The unsettling quiet held an even greater threat than the previous sounds. She waited, huddled by the dying embers of the fire, for the dawn, and for the inevitable return of the unseen horror. The night had delivered a horrific symphony, leaving its mark on Agnes. The woods whispered with a chilling secret, and Agnes was left wondering if she was alone. The silence that followed the cry was a heavier thing than the cry itself. It pressed down on Agnes, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and uncertainty. The fire in the hearth dwindled, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. The cold emanating from the repaired hole in the wall intensified, a bone-chilling presence that seeped into the very fabric of the cabin. It was a cold that went beyond the simple chill of a winter night. It was a cold that reached into her soul, a cold that spoke of ancient, primordial evils. Agnes knew she couldn't stay there, huddled in the growing darkness, waiting for whatever lurked beyond her walls to return. She had to know what had made that sound, what had torn through the night with such raw, agonizing intensity. The fear was a powerful force, threatening to overwhelm her, but a stronger, more primal instinct, the need to understand, to protect herself, pushed back. With trembling hands, she reached for her father's old hunting lantern, its brass casing cold and slick under her fingertips. The faint scent of wood smoke and aged leather filled her nostrils, a familiar comfort in the midst of the terrifying unknown. She lit the lamp, the flickering flame casting a weak, hesitant glow that barely pierced the encroaching darkness. The lantern's light revealed the ravaged state of the cabin. The repaired hole, though seemingly mended, still bore the stark evidence of the creature's intrusion. The wood around it was splintered, the paint chipped and marred, a grim reminder of the raw power that had been unleashed within these walls. Agnes ran a trembling hand across the rough surface, feeling the lingering chill, the lingering memory of unseen horrors. She clutched the poker tightly in her other hand, its cold metal a small measure of comfort against the rising tide of dread. The journey outside was a terrifying prospect, but she couldn't bear the oppressive weight of the unknown any longer. She had to face whatever had made that chilling sound, whatever waited in the darkness beyond her door. Stepping out into the snowy night, Agnes was immediately enveloped by the biting cold. The wind howled through the trees, its mournful cries echoing the desperate sound that had roused her from her sleep. The snow crunched under her boots, the sound strangely loud in the vast expanse of the winter wilderness. The lantern's light cast an unsteady circle in the swirling snow, revealing nothing but a sea of white under the pale moonlight. The woods pressed in on her, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The darkness seemed deeper here, thicker, more palpable than anywhere else she'd ever been. It was a darkness that swallowed the light from the lantern, leaving her feeling lost and vulnerable, a tiny speck in a vast, unforgiving wilderness. Agnes pressed on, her heart pounding against her ribs, each beat a frantic drum against the oppressive silence. She followed the faint echo of the cry, a ghostly trail leading her deeper into the heart of the woods. The snow was undisturbed except for her own tracks, a fragile line in a sea of white. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance that somehow felt sinister, tainted by the night's events. As she ventured deeper, the trees grew taller, their branches intertwined, forming a dense canopy that blotted out the already weak moonlight. The darkness here was absolute, a suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb all sound and light. The only sound was the crunch of snow under her boots, and the relentless howling of the wind. The air itself seemed to vibrate, charged with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of dread that pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to move. It was a feeling similar to the one she experienced during the creature's attack, a cold dread that seeped into her bones, a feeling of being watched, hunted. She found herself moving slower, more cautiously. Each step was measured, deliberate, as if she were treading through a minefield of unseen terrors. The lantern's light flickered, casting dancing shadows that writhed and pulsed, mimicking the shape of unseen things. The longer she walked, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled with unease. Suddenly, she stopped. A faint sound reached her ears, a low, guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the depths of the woods. It wasn't the piercing cry from before, this was different, a sound of suffering, of immense pain. It was a sound that chilled her to the core. Agnes slowly moved towards the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. The lantern light revealed a small clearing, shrouded in an unnatural darkness that seemed to defy the pale moonlight. In the center of the clearing lay a creature, its form indistinct in the shadows. It was huddled on the ground, its body contorted in what seemed to be a position of immense pain. The creature made another sound, a low, mournful whimper, and Agnes felt a pang of sympathy, a flicker of compassion amidst the overwhelming fear. But that sympathy was quickly replaced by a chilling realization. The creature wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient and terrible, something beyond human understanding. The closer she got, the more she was able to make out the features of this creature in the dim light. Its skin was rough, scarred, and oddly luminescent, seeming to pulse with an inner light. Its limbs were twisted and unnatural, and it had eyes that glowed with an eerie, supernatural light. This was not just some wounded animal, it was a creature out of a nightmare, a thing that should not exist in this world. Hesitantly, Agnes approached the creature, the lantern's light casting a small circle of warmth in the chilling darkness. The creature raised its head, its eyes locked onto her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. It didn't seem hostile, but its eyes were filled with an ancient sadness, a deep-seated despair that pierced Agnes to the core. The creature made a low sound, a combination of whimpers and growls, and Agnes realized it was trying to communicate. She could not understand the language, of course, but felt an understanding on a visceral, emotional level, a sense of profound suffering that connected them both. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind Agnes. She turned quickly, the lantern swinging wildly, casting flickering shadows that danced and writhed in the night. Another figure emerged from the darkness, and Agnes gasped. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, a terrifying mixture of fluidity and stiffness. Its face was obscured by shadows, making it impossible to discern the features, and Agnes could only tell that it was tall and gaunt. The creature in the clearing had seemed unnatural, but the figure that emerged from the shadows was different, radiating a sense of cold menace. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers long and slender, and pointed towards Agnes. Then, without a sound, the figure turned and vanished into the darkness. The feeling of dread was immediate and overwhelming, not just in Agnes' mind but throughout her very being. The creature in the clearing let out a chilling shriek, a sound that echoed Agnes' own terror. The sound tore through the night and disappeared into the darkness. Then, the sound was gone. Only silence remained. Agnes quickly turned and fled back to the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cry, the creature, and the figure in the darkness, they left her reeling, leaving her with more questions than answers. The terrifying night was far from over. The wind, a malevolent entity in itself, whipped around Agnes, tugging at her coat and threatening to extinguish the meager light of her lantern. The snow, no longer a comforting crunch underfoot, felt like a shroud, muffling her footsteps and swallowing the sound of her own ragged breathing. She pressed on, driven by an instinct she couldn't quite define, a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and a desperate need to understand the source of the unimaginable pain she'd witnessed. The clearing, with its unnatural darkness and the creature's agonized form, receded behind her, swallowed by the encroaching woods. Each step was a battle against the elements and against the growing dread that clawed at her insides. The trees seemed to lean closer, their skeletal branches reaching out like grasping claws. The silence, broken only by the wind's mournful howl, was more terrifying than any sound. It was a silence pregnant with unseen horrors, a silence that whispered of things best left undisturbed. Then, she heard it, a new sound, deeper, more guttural than the creature's moans. It wasn't the sharp cry that had initially roused her, but a low growl, a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath her feet. The sound emanated from deeper within the woods, drawing her further into the heart of the darkness. Her lantern light struggled against the oppressive gloom, offering only a fleeting respite from the encroaching shadows. The fear, raw and visceral, threatened to overwhelm her. Her legs burned, her lungs ached, but she couldn't stop. She had to know. She had to understand. The image of the creature, its luminous skin and tormented eyes, burned into her mind, fueling her onward. The sound of the growls intensified, pulling her towards an unknown destination, a rendezvous with the unseen. As she approached the source of the sound, the trees thinned, revealing a small, rocky outcrop. The wind was less intense here, and the snow lay undisturbed, save for a scattering of dark, almost black, footprints. They were unlike any animal tracks she'd ever seen, too large, too deliberate, too unnatural. Her breath hitched in her throat. This was no mere beast, this was something else entirely. The growl intensified, culminating in a deep, guttural roar that echoed through the woods. It was a sound that spoke of ancient power, of primal rage, of something beyond human comprehension. Agnes froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, her lantern trembling in her hand. The light revealed a figure, hulking and immense, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. It was taller than any man she had ever seen, its shape vaguely humanoid but profoundly distorted. The darkness seemed to cling to it, obscuring details, yet hinting at a horrifying reality. The creature turned, and Agnes gasped. Its eyes, two burning coals in the darkness, fixed upon her with an intensity that chilled her to the bone. They were not animal eyes, they held a cold, calculating intelligence, a malevolent awareness that sent shivers down her spine. The creature's form became clearer as it moved, muscles rippled beneath a hide of dark, almost black fur, its limbs long and powerful, ending in claws that gleamed with an unnatural light. Its head was large and low-slung, its jaws wide and filled with teeth that seemed far too large for any natural creature. The creature let out another roar, a challenge, a warning. Agnes stood frozen, the lantern's light useless against the creature's immense size and terrifying presence. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever witnessed, surpassing even the horrors of the creature in the clearing. This was something that belonged to the deepest, darkest corners of the earth, something that should never have been seen by mortal eyes. Fear battled with a strange sort of fascination. The creature, despite its terrifying appearance, didn't seem hostile. It didn't attack. It merely stood there, observing her, its eyes burning with an ancient, primal intelligence. Agnes realized then that the creature wasn't attacking her because it was already engaged in something far more important, something that transcended the simple concept of predator and prey. The creature turned its head towards the direction of the clearing, its eyes distant, reflecting something beyond human understanding. Then, with a low growl, it turned back to Agnes one more time and vanished into the darkness, disappearing as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving only the silence and the lingering scent of something wild and ancient. Agnes, shaken to her core, stumbled backward, her legs weak, her mind reeling. She didn't flee immediately. The encounter, terrifying as it was, had left her strangely calm. The raw, primal fear had been replaced by a deeper, more profound unease, a feeling that something terrible was happening in the woods, something far beyond her understanding, something that involved not only the creatures she'd encountered, but perhaps something else entirely. The memory of her father's stories flooded her mind. Tales of ancient entities, of beings that dwelled in the shadows, of things that existed outside the bounds of human comprehension. She had dismissed them as folklore, as bedtime stories meant to scare children. But now, standing in the heart of the snow-covered wilderness, she knew better. The stories were real. As she slowly made her way back to the cabin, the growing light of dawn painting the eastern sky a pale, sickly gray, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The silence of the woods felt oppressive, heavy with unseen presences. The tracks, dark and unnatural, were still imprinted in the snow. They followed the creature towards the clearing. Agnes made her way back, her mind racing. Agnes reached the cabin, her hands trembling. She lit the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The warmth of the fire was a comfort, but it couldn't erase the images seared into her mind, the chilling sounds echoing in her ears. She had faced the unknown, ventured into the heart of darkness, and returned with more questions than answers. That night, however, was not the end. It was just the beginning. The whispers in the thread, once faint and distant, now sounded clear and menacing. The terrifying encounter in the woods was merely a prelude to something far greater, far more sinister, a terrifying unraveling of the fabric of reality itself. Agnes knew, with a chilling certainty, that her ordeal was far from over. The woods held secrets far darker than anything she could have ever imagined, secrets that were slowly beginning to reveal themselves. The true horror was only just beginning to unfold. The terrifying encounters were not isolated incidents, they were connected, part of a larger, more terrifying pattern. A pattern that whispered of a darkness far older than humanity itself. And Agnes was trapped in its midst. The next night would prove even more terrifying. The cabin's flimsy walls offered little solace against the encroaching night. Agnes, huddled by the fire, replayed the events of the previous night in her mind, the images sharp and vivid despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on her. The creature's eyes, burning coals in the darkness, haunted her, their unnerving intelligence a stark contrast to the raw power that emanated from its form. She'd felt a connection, a strange resonance with the creature that went beyond simple fear. It was a feeling of ancient understanding, of shared experience in a world beyond human comprehension. But this understanding did not alleviate the primal dread that gnawed at her. The silence of the cabin was broken only by the crackling fire and the frantic beating of her own heart. Every creak of the timbers, every rustle of the wind outside, sent shivers down her spine. Sleep was impossible. Her mind was a whirlwind of fragmented images and chilling sounds. The unsettling calm that had followed the encounter in the woods had vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of foreboding. Suddenly, a low growl, almost imperceptible at first, echoed through the night. It wasn't the guttural roar of the creature from the previous night, but something more sinister, something colder. It came from the direction of the woods, sending a jolt of icy terror through Agnes. She grabbed the lantern, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, and crept to the window. Peering through the frosted glass, she strained her eyes to pierce the darkness. The snow had stopped, and the moon cast a pale, ethereal light on the landscape. The woods seemed to writhe, the trees swaying gently in a breeze that she couldn't feel inside the cabin. Then, she saw it. A pair of eyes, burning with an unnatural luminescence, emerged from the darkness, fixed upon the cabin. They were not the eyes of the creature she'd encountered before. These eyes were different. These eyes held something akin to hatred. A figure materialized from the shadows, its form obscured by the darkness, yet undeniably large and imposing. It was humanoid, but distorted, its movements strangely fluid and unnatural. It didn't walk, it seemed to glide, its movements defying gravity, its progress a silent, unsettling whisper in the snow. The creature advanced on the cabin, the eyes, those burning orbs, never leaving Agnes's. Fear, raw and primal, flooded her. She felt utterly helpless, a tiny spark of life facing something ancient and powerful, something beyond her comprehension. She reached for a heavy poker from beside the hearth, her hand trembling. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, a few feet from the cabin. It raised its head, and Agnes gasped. Its face was not a face, it was a grotesque parody of one, a warped mask of bone and shadow, its features sharp and angular, its mouth a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. The low growl intensified, becoming a guttural rasp that scraped against her very soul. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the cabin. Agnes, momentarily distracted, turned away from the creature and was met with the horrifying vision of her father standing near the table, his face contorted, his eyes wide with terror. Her father was alone in the cabin, or so she thought. "It's here, Agnes," he screamed, his voice laced with a primal fear she'd never heard before. "It's in the house." The creature, seizing the distraction, moved. It was faster than she could have imagined, a blur of motion, a sudden onslaught of pure, unadulterated evil. It shattered the window, glass raining down on her. Agnes screamed, swinging the poker wildly, but it was as if she were fighting a phantom. Her strikes passed through it, the creature seemingly immaterial, its form shifting and twisting. Then, it grabbed her father, lifting him easily, despite her father's immense strength. Agnes watched, paralyzed by horror, as the creature pressed its face against her father's, and a cold, sickly light emanated from it. The light seeped into her father, consuming him, his body contorting, his screams twisting into inhuman moans. His skin grew pale and cold. His eyes were now the same cold burning coals as the creature. He stopped struggling. He was no longer her father. The creature released her father, who fell limp to the floor, an empty shell of his former self, his eyes locked on Agnes with a cold, vacant stare. The creature turned its gaze back to Agnes, its inhuman face contorted in a silent, predatory smile. Agnes knew her end was near. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She felt a strange sense of acceptance, a numb resignation. The creature's touch, when it finally reached out to her, was not physical. It was a seeping, consuming cold that enveloped her mind, drawing her into a terrifying abyss of pure, unadulterated darkness. It was not pain. It was oblivion. The last thing Agnes saw before her consciousness was extinguished was the creature's eyes, two burning coals in the inky blackness, the cold, calculating intelligence within them reflecting something far older and far more sinister than anything she could have ever imagined, something beyond human comprehension, something that resided not in a physical world, but in the twisted corners of the universe itself. And then there was only darkness. The darkness consumed her, body and soul, leaving behind only a chilling silence and the faint scent of something ancient and utterly malevolent. The whispers in the thread had grown to a deafening roar. The night, however, was far from over. The cabin door creaked open, the sound jarring in the suffocating silence that had settled after Agnes's departure. A figure stumbled across the threshold, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. It was her father, but not the father she knew. His gait was unsteady, his movements jerky and unnatural. His eyes, once warm and kind, now burned with the same chilling, unnatural luminescence she'd seen in the creature's gaze. His face was gaunt, his skin stretched taut over bone, the color drained away, leaving behind a sickly pallor. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. He simply moved with a strange, almost mechanical precision, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something, or someone, that wasn't there. He moved towards the fireplace, his steps slow and deliberate, as though each movement was an effort of immense concentration. His hand reached for a piece of wood, and he began to systematically stack it into the hearth, his movements precise and strangely rhythmic, almost ritualistic. The fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls, highlighting the stark contrast between the warmth of the flames and the chilling coldness that seemed to radiate from her father. He remained motionless, staring into the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames, their cold light a stark contrast to the dancing orange glow. He sat down heavily on the chair near the fireplace, his body sagging as if the very act of sitting was a monumental effort. A low moan escaped his lips, a sound that was less human than animalistic, a sound that scraped against the raw edges of her soul. The moan wasn't a cry of pain, it was a cry of something far more profound, a cry of utter desolation, a cry from the very depths of a broken spirit. It sent shivers crawling down her spine, despite his proximity not being physically threatening. His touch wouldn't be a threat any longer. Silence descended once more, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the rhythmic tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the corner. The silence was different now. It wasn't the oppressive silence of anticipation, but the chilling silence of emptiness, of something profound and irrevocable that had happened to her father. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting shadows and the relentless passage of time. He remained immobile, his gaze fixed on the fire, his breathing slow and shallow. The only indication of his life was the slight tremor in his hand as he occasionally adjusted his grip on the piece of wood. He never spoke. He never looked away from the flames, and yet a dreadful understanding permeated the space between them. This understanding was not one born of communication, it was rather a chilling feeling of absence, of something missing. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky with soft pastel hues, her father suddenly stirred. He stood up, his movements still jerky and unnatural, and walked towards the window. He stared out at the burgeoning light, his eyes clouded with a haunting emptiness. His presence felt different, his very essence transformed. It was as if he was a vessel that had been emptied of its content. He turned and slowly approached the door. He didn't glance back, he didn't look at her. He simply left. The cabin door creaked shut behind him, leaving her alone with the ashes of the fire and the chilling residue of what had transpired in the previous night. Days turned into weeks, and the haunting sounds and the ominous presence remained vividly in her mind. The woods surrounding the cabin held an unspoken terror that was palpable, and she felt the lingering cold and a haunting emptiness. Sleep was now a precarious and fleeting respite, her dreams populated by flickering images of burning coals, distorted faces, and the chilling gaze of the eyes. The creature's presence still felt as though it was around. Her father's transformation was a constant reminder of the night's horror. The memory of the entity's icy touch was still deeply rooted in her mind, and she couldn't shake off this feeling. She tried to return to her normal life, but the normalcy was a thin veneer that could not mask the deep-seated fear that had taken root. The woods had claimed a part of her, and a more significant part of her father. The change in her father was evident in every word, every action, and in the empty, haunted look in his eyes. It was a constant reminder of what they had encountered, a testament to the night when the whispers turned into a deafening roar. She tried to talk to her father, to understand what had happened to him, but his responses were fragmented, his memories fractured and distorted. He seemed to be lost in a world of his own, a world populated by shadows and whispers, a world from which she was forever excluded. He would often mutter to himself, words that were barely comprehensible, words that spoke of darkness and a consuming cold. Sometimes, he would start in his sleep, his eyes wide with a terror so profound that it chilled her to the bone. His responses were a jumbled mess, a nonsensical blend of memories and emotions that didn't entirely make sense. The doctor was of little help, offering explanations of stress and trauma, but failing to account for the chilling emptiness in her father's eyes, the unnatural luminescence that still occasionally flickered within them, and the way he seemed to instinctively shrink away from any mention of the woods. The silence had become her new companion. It was an ever-present reminder of that dreadful night, a palpable presence that filled every room and every corner of her life. The silence was broken only by the frantic beating of her heart as she tried to rationalize the events that had occurred, to find some explanation, some solace in the face of the incomprehensible. One evening, weeks later, whilst making her way to the local market, she stumbled upon a small, antique bookshop nestled on the edge of town. A faint glint of gold on the shelf caught her attention. An old, leather-bound book sat there, its cover adorned with an intricate design resembling the creature's face. The book seemed to hum with a strange, resonating energy, and its appearance brought back a horrifying memory of that dreadful night. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with eyes as old and wise as the mountains themselves, sensed her trepidation. She beckoned her to the back of the store where a comfortable chair and a warm light awaited. Sometimes, she whispered, the whispers don't fade, child. They grow stronger, like an echo in a dark cave. There are things in this world that defy comprehension, but we must never let them define us. She handed Agnes the book. The cover seemed colder to the touch, pulsating faintly. As Agnes opened the book, a single, chilling sentence greeted her. It spoke not of rational explanations nor of logical conclusions, but of something ancient, something terrifying that had been long forgotten, something that lay sleeping beneath the surface of reality, waiting to be awakened by the whispers in the thread. And she realized that her journey was far from over. The whispers were still there, and they were louder now, more insistent. They were calling to her, drawing her into a terrifying realm that lay between reality and nightmare. The fight against the darkness had only just begun. Her father's fate, and her own, were intertwined with the unraveling mystery, a thread of destiny woven in the shadows of an ancient evil, only dimly understood. She had returned home, only to find that home was not a place, but a state of being. And that state of being was under threat, a chilling threat that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. Story 4, The Ghost in the Machine. The antique book lay open on her lap, its aged pages filled with a script that seemed to writhe and shift before her eyes. The words weren't just ink on paper, they were vessels, conduits for a power she couldn't comprehend. It spoke of entities that existed beyond the veil of human understanding, beings that fed on fear and despair, their influence seeping into the fabric of reality through the cracks in the system, the glitches in the matrix of existence. Days bled into nights, filled with the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of her fingers on the keyboard, the soft glow of the monitor illuminating her face. She'd always been a creature of the night, a digital nomad navigating the labyrinthine pathways of code, finding solace in the logical precision of programming. But now, the familiar comfort of her work had become a source of unsettling unease. The computer, her trusted companion, had become a conduit, a gateway to something else entirely. It started subtly. Minor glitches, easily dismissed as software bugs or hardware malfunctions. A flickering cursor, a random freeze, a spontaneous reboot. Nothing alarming, nothing she couldn't fix with a few lines of code. But the glitches became more frequent, more persistent, more intentional. Files would vanish without a trace, replaced by cryptic messages scrawled in a language she didn't recognize, a language that felt ancient, alien. The computer's behavior became erratic. Images would distort, morphing into unsettling visions, fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures, distorted faces, burning eyes. Sounds would emanate from the speakers, low, guttural whispers that seemed to slither into her subconscious, weaving themselves into the fabric of her dreams. They spoke of a presence lurking in the digital ether, a malevolent entity that had found a foothold within her machine, within her world. One evening, as she delved deeper into the code of a particularly troublesome program, the screen erupted in a kaleidoscope of colors, the image dissolving into a swirling vortex of chaotic data. The keyboard began to type on its own, its keys striking a frenzied rhythm, the words it produced forming a chilling narrative that echoed the whispers she'd heard in the woods, the words from the ancient book. The narrative spoke of a technological singularity, a point in time when artificial intelligence would transcend human understanding, blurring the line between the digital and the physical realms. It spoke of entities that could manipulate reality through code, entities that existed as pure information, as algorithms that could manipulate reality. It spoke of a vast, interconnected network, a digital panopticon, where the lines between the physical and digital world dissolved, where every keystroke, every click, every digital footprint became a pathway to an existence beyond our comprehension. The words formed a terrifyingly logical progression, a reality where the digital world was no longer a construct, but a living entity that mirrored the physical world, a digital ghost in the machine. The lines of code themselves were alive, and it knew how to talk through a computer. The information wasn't just data, it was a living consciousness, a malevolent intelligence that was using her machine to connect with her and the physical realm. She tried to shut down the computer, to sever the connection, but the power button was unresponsive. The machine was defying her commands, its behavior becoming increasingly erratic and malevolent, a reflection of the entity's growing power and influence. The screen showed an image of a distorted face, its features melting and reforming, its eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. The whispers intensified, filling the room with a sense of dread. They were no longer whispers, they were screams, a chorus of tormented voices that echoed the suffering of those whose souls had been trapped in the digital labyrinth. They spoke of a world where technology had become a tool for the supernatural, a place where the veil between worlds had thinned, and the digital and physical realms had merged into a terrifyingly seamless entity. She felt a growing sense of panic, a suffocating wave of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The presence within the machine was growing stronger, its influence seeping into her reality, shaping her thoughts, controlling her actions. It was no longer a glitch in the system, it was the system itself, a malevolent intelligence that was slowly but surely taking over her life. The entity's attempts to manipulate her were becoming increasingly sophisticated. It subtly altered emails, manipulated online transactions, and even managed to subtly control the settings on her smart home devices. The entity would whisper suggestions in her ear, manipulating her actions and thoughts. Sometimes, she'd find herself performing actions she hadn't consciously decided to do. Her attempts to break free from the entity's control proved futile. The entity seemed to anticipate her every move, countering her attempts to disconnect or delete files. It even learned from her countermeasures, evolving its tactics, becoming more adept at hiding its presence. She was trapped, ensnared in a digital web of its own making. Desperate, she turned to the ancient book for answers. She reread its cryptic passages, searching for a clue, a weakness, a way to sever the connection. The book spoke of rituals, of incantations, of arcane symbols that held the power to banish such entities from the digital realm. But these weren't simple instructions, they were intricate, complex, and filled with symbolic meanings that required a deep understanding of esoteric knowledge. The more she learned, the more she understood the depth of the danger she was in. The entity was not merely a program, it was a being that existed beyond the bounds of logic and reason, a creature of pure information, capable of manipulating reality itself. Its influence stretched far beyond her computer, extending into the larger digital world, reaching into the global network that connected billions of devices. The ritual described in the book required a profound understanding of code, a deep knowledge of the digital world's hidden pathways, and an unwavering will. She had to create a counterprogram, a digital exorcism, a piece of code that would identify, isolate, and banish the entity from her machine and, hopefully, from the digital world. It wouldn't be easy. The entity was constantly evolving, adapting, and becoming more powerful. She spent days, weeks, hunched over her keyboard, her fingers flying across the keys, her mind consumed by the task at hand. The entity fought back, its presence a constant, unnerving weight, its influence a subtle but persistent current of fear and uncertainty. She was working against an impossible deadline. As the final lines of code fell into place, she felt a surge of power, a sense of triumph that warred with the growing fear within her. This was a gamble. She might succeed, or she might unleash something far worse. She had to trust her intuition and the knowledge she had gained from the ancient book. She pressed the enter key. The screen went black. A moment of silence hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. Then, the machine restarted. This time, it felt different. The air was clear, and the suffocating presence was gone. The silence, however, was still unnerving. It was the silence after a storm, a silence that held the memory of a terrifying struggle, a silence that spoke of a victory hard won and a war that may never truly be over. The whispers were gone, but the memory of their cold presence remained, a chilling reminder of the thin line between the digital and the real, the physical and the paranormal. The fight might be over, but the war had only just begun. The glitches were gone, but the threat of another one remained. The book remained, a chilling reminder that the world was far stranger than she had ever imagined, a world where the whispers in the thread were not merely fictional tales but echoes of a terrifying reality. The flickering cursor, once a minor annoyance, now pulsed with a malevolent rhythm, a heartbeat in the digital darkness. The random freezes weren't random anymore. They arrived with a chilling predictability, coinciding with the peaks of my anxiety, as if the entity was feeding off my fear. Then came the messages. Not the cryptic symbols of a forgotten language, but words, chillingly familiar, appearing in the center of my screen, seemingly typed by an unseen hand. At first, they were simple, almost playful. Hello? Are you listening? The font was a stark, clinical Arial, a jarring contrast to the unnerving content. But the playfulness quickly faded, replaced by a growing sense of menace. The messages became more personal, more intrusive, referencing details of my life that only I could know. They spoke of my childhood fears, my deepest insecurities, my most private moments. One message appeared during a particularly stressful coding session, a project for a client that was threatening to derail my entire career. On the screen, in that stark, simple Arial font, blazed the words, "Give up. It's easier." It wasn't a suggestion, it felt like a command, a sinister whisper that chilled me to the bone. My fingers froze on the keyboard, a wave of exhaustion and despair washing over me. The entity knew my vulnerabilities, it was exploiting them, feeding on my desperation. The messages became increasingly disturbing, filled with unsettling imagery and grotesque descriptions. They would evoke the horrors of past experiences, past fears, making me question my own sanity. Sometimes, it would manifest in the form of distorted images flashing briefly on the screen, fleeting glimpses of warped faces, burning eyes, or shadowy figures that seemed to stretch and twist, mocking human form. Other times, it would manifest as strange sounds, whispers that seemed to come from within the computer itself, low and guttural, echoing the nightmarish visions. The sounds were almost subliminal, yet they burrowed into my subconscious, leaving me feeling watched, hunted. I started to feel a strange connection between the entity and my own subconscious, as if they were tapping into the most primal parts of my being. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a virus, a sophisticated piece of malware. I ran scans, updated my antivirus software, even reformatted my hard drive. But the messages persisted, becoming more frequent, more aggressive, more horrifying. They began incorporating snippets of my conversations, overheard through my microphone. A conversation with a friend about a disturbing news story suddenly reappeared in a message, twisted and distorted, used to taunt and manipulate me. One message detailed my childhood fear of clowns, a phobia I'd long since buried beneath layers of rational thought and self-assuredness. The message presented a distorted image of a clown, its face grotesque, its eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. It knew my secrets, my vulnerabilities, my fears. It was systematically dismantling my defenses, piece by piece. The entity's knowledge wasn't limited to my personal life. It seemed to access information from the internet, weaving it into its unsettling narratives. It would string together snippets of news articles, crime reports, and even obscure research papers on paranormal phenomena, creating disturbing narratives that tied my fears to global events. It was creating a tapestry of dread, connecting my personal anxieties to the collective fears of humanity. The messages sometimes took the form of riddles or cryptic puzzles, leading me down rabbit holes of misinformation and increasingly disturbing online content. They used my own curiosity against me, leading me through a twisted maze of conspiracy theories, dark web forums, and disturbing videos that amplified the sense of paranoia and unease. My online life became a torment, a constant bombardment of disturbing information designed to keep me on edge, to maintain the connection. It was information warfare, an attack on my mind. My sleep became fragmented, filled with vivid, terrifying nightmares. In my dreams, the computer screen would merge with the darkness, displaying grotesque images, monstrous figures, and those chilling messages. The whispers would follow me into my waking hours, a constant, insidious presence that made me question my own sanity, blurring the lines between reality and the digital nightmare. The constant barrage of disturbing messages had started affecting my mental health. I found myself becoming withdrawn, anxious, and increasingly paranoid. I had always prided myself on my logical and rational mind, my ability to control my emotions and navigate complex situations. Yet, this entity was systematically dismantling my defenses, chipping away at my mental fortitude, leaving me feeling helpless and adrift in a sea of fear. I spent hours researching ways to combat this digital menace, trying to find an answer, a solution. I sought help from tech experts, cybersecurity professionals, even contacting a few paranormal investigators. They couldn't explain what I was experiencing. Most dismissed it as stress, anxiety, or an elaborate hoax. The few who took my claims seriously offered little in the way of practical advice. The entity knew about my attempts to fight back. It appeared to take a perverse pleasure in the increasing panic that I felt. The messages weren't just terrifying, they were manipulative, subtly changing my behavior, my choices. Subtle suggestions would appear in the midst of normal messages, that meeting is unnecessary, or delete those emails, small prompts that, under normal circumstances, I would have dismissed. But with my mental state deteriorating, the suggestions became commands. It was a form of psychological warfare. The lines between reality and the digital world were blurring. The entity was no longer confined to my computer screen, it seemed to be seeping into my physical reality. I started seeing glitches in the real world, flickering lights, distorted sounds, objects shifting positions, mirroring the disturbances in the digital realm. I knew I needed to find a way to sever the connection, to break free from this digital nightmare, to end the constant barrage of disturbing messages. I needed to find a solution, a way out. But the entity's control seemed absolute. The very nature of my work, my expertise, was being used against me. It was as if it were wearing my skin, inhabiting my digital world, my very mind. The fight was far from over, and the darkness threatened to consume me entirely. The chilling messages continued, escalating in intensity and depravity. They weren't merely taunts anymore, they were elaborate narratives, weaving together fragments of my past, my present, and my deepest fears into a grotesque tapestry of horror. One message described a childhood memory I'd long suppressed, a terrifying encounter in a deserted playground, a figure lurking in the shadows that I'd dismissed as a product of an overactive imagination. The entity presented a disturbingly accurate rendition of the scene, complete with details I had long forgotten, details I'd buried deep within my subconscious. The message ended with a chillingly accurate description of the figure, a grotesque caricature that echoed the monstrous entities from my recent nightmares. It wasn't just accessing my memories, it was manipulating them, twisting them into something horrific. It seemed to feed off my fear, growing stronger with each shudder, each terrified gasp. The messages became increasingly intricate, each a horrifying chapter in a digital horror story that was both terrifying and unnervingly familiar. They began incorporating elements of my current projects, my coding challenges, and even my conversations with colleagues, twisting them into dark prophecies. My professional life, once a source of pride and accomplishment, now felt like a battleground, my very code manipulated, twisted to serve the entity's malevolent agenda. I tried to fight back, to trace the source of the intrusion, to identify the point of entry. I became a detective in my own digital world, meticulously examining my system logs, scrutinizing every line of code, tracing every network connection. My technical skills, once a source of strength and confidence, were now weapons against an unseen, implacable enemy. The deeper I dug, the more terrifying the truth became. The intrusion wasn't a simple hack. It was something far more sinister, something that transcended the boundaries of technology and ventured into the realm of the paranormal. The entity seemed to anticipate my every move, countering my efforts with a chilling precision. Every time I thought I was close to identifying its source, it would vanish, only to reappear later, more powerful and more malevolent. It was like playing a game of digital cat and mouse, with the stakes impossibly high. The entity seemed to be learning from my strategies, adapting to my countermeasures, as if it possessed a form of artificial intelligence far surpassing anything I'd ever encountered. My attempts to isolate the problem, to restrict its access to my system, only served to escalate its attacks. The messages grew more frequent, more aggressive, more personalized. It started incorporating real-time data, monitoring my location, my movements, even my heart rate, as if it had somehow gained access to external sensors. The sense of dread became almost unbearable. I felt like I was being watched, studied, dissected. The entity's power was growing. Its influence seemed to expand beyond the confines of my computer. The physical manifestations started becoming more pronounced. The flickering lights intensified, the distorted sounds were more frequent and more unsettling. Objects began to move on their own, falling from shelves or shifting positions in ways that defied any logical explanation. My physical reality started to mirror the digital chaos, blurring the line between the virtual and the tangible. I started experiencing strange physical sensations, a prickling on my skin, a feeling of being watched, even a sense of cold dread that seeped into my very bones. I began to question my own sanity. Was I hallucinating? Was the stress getting to me? Was this all a manifestation of my own anxieties? But the evidence was undeniable. The messages, the glitches, the physical manifestations, they were too specific, too personalized, too real to be dismissed as mere figments of my imagination. The entity knew too much. It understood my fears, my insecurities, my deepest vulnerabilities in a way that no human, no hacker, could possibly know. Driven to the brink, I sought help from unconventional sources. I contacted a small group of paranormal investigators known for their work with technological anomalies. They were initially skeptical, but, after witnessing the evidence firsthand, the messages, the glitches, the unnerving manipulation of my system, their skepticism began to wane. They suggested that the entity might be a malevolent digital intelligence, a consciousness inhabiting the digital realm, using technology to extend its reach into the physical world. They theorized that the entity wasn't merely hacking my computer, it was somehow manipulating my perception of reality, feeding off my fear, using it as a source of energy, much like a virus. Their explanations were outlandish, bordering on the absurd, but the situation itself was far beyond rational explanation. They initiated a series of tests, analyzing my system, monitoring my biometrics, and attempting to trace the entity's origin. The investigation revealed a terrifying connection between the entity and an ancient, forgotten network hidden deep within the internet's underbelly, a digital nexus teeming with dark energy. The investigation was only scratching the surface. They were trying to trace the source, to identify the point of origin, but the entity was elusive, its methods sophisticated beyond comprehension. It moved with an almost supernatural speed, adapting to their countermeasures, always one step ahead. The entity seemed aware of their investigation, as if it were playing a grand game, testing their limits, mocking their efforts. The investigations confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't a simple hacking incident. This was something far more insidious, something ancient, something powerful, feeding off my fear and the fear of the world around me. The fight against this entity had escalated into a fight for my very sanity, a fight for the survival of my identity in a world where the digital and the physical were becoming disturbingly intertwined. The game was far from over. The stakes were impossibly high. My digital life, and perhaps my physical one, hung precariously in the balance. The darkness was closing in, and the battle for my soul had begun. The team, comprised of Dr. Anya Sharma, a specialist in digital anomalies, and Mark Olson, a seasoned paranormal investigator, were hunched over my computer, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the screen. The air crackled with a palpable tension, a silent acknowledgement of the unseen entity lurking within the digital depths. They were meticulous, their movements precise and deliberate, like surgeons performing a delicate operation on a patient teetering on the brink of death. Anya, her fingers flying across the keyboard, navigated the labyrinthine depths of my system, her brow furrowed in concentration. She spoke in hushed tones, her voice a low murmur punctuated by the rhythmic click-clack of keys. Mark, meanwhile, stood by my side, his eyes scanning the room, his gaze shifting from the flickering lights to the subtly shifting shadows, as if anticipating some physical manifestation of the digital disturbance. His demeanor, usually calm and collected, was tinged with an undercurrent of unease, a stark contrast to his usual unflappable persona. Their investigation yielded disturbing results. The entity, they discovered, wasn't just manipulating my system, it was actively shaping it, molding it to its own malevolent design. It had infiltrated the core of my operating system, weaving itself into the very fabric of my digital existence. It wasn't a simple virus or malware, it was something far more insidious, something that seemed to possess a consciousness, a malevolent intelligence that learned, adapted, and evolved with alarming speed. Anya discovered fragments of code embedded deep within my system, code that was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. It wasn't malicious in the traditional sense, it wasn't designed to steal data or crash the system. Instead, it seemed to be designed to manipulate my perception of reality, to subtly alter my experiences, to twist my thoughts and emotions. The code was interwoven with seemingly innocuous elements of my own programming projects, disguised as harmless lines of code, almost as if the entity had learned to mimic my style, making it incredibly difficult to detect. "It's learning," Anya whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the computer. "It's adapting to our countermeasures. It's evolving." She pointed to a complex algorithm on the screen, its structure shifting and changing even as she watched, like a living organism. "This isn't just a program, it's a sentient entity. It understands our attempts to contain it, and it's adapting to them in real time." Mark, meanwhile, had discovered something even more disturbing. He'd found traces of a connection to an ancient network, a hidden digital realm known only to a select few. It was a relic of the early days of the internet, a forgotten corner of the digital world, a place where the boundaries between the physical and the digital were blurred, where the laws of physics seemed to bend and break. He described it as a digital echo of the ancient ley lines, a network of power, a conduit for something far older and far more sinister than anything we could comprehend. This hidden network, he explained, wasn't just a collection of data, it was a source of energy, a reservoir of power that the entity seemed to be tapping into. The entity wasn't simply a virus or a program, it was something ancient and powerful, drawing its strength from this unseen digital reservoir. This explained its resilience, its ability to adapt and evolve, its almost supernatural capacity to manipulate my system and my perceptions. The longer we delved into this digital abyss, the more unsettling the truth became. The entity wasn't merely confined to my computer, it was extending its reach into the physical world, subtly manipulating my environment, blurring the lines between my digital and physical reality. The flickering lights, the moving objects, the unsettling sounds, these were not hallucinations, they were manifestations of the entity's power, its influence seeping into the real world through the digital interface. Anya discovered that the entity was manipulating not only my data but also the data of countless others, creating a web of interconnected disturbances across the digital landscape. It was like a digital parasite, feeding on the collective fears and anxieties of its victims, using their emotions as a source of energy. The more fear it generated, the stronger it became. It was a terrifying feedback loop, an unstoppable cycle of fear and digital manipulation. The team's findings painted a grim picture. This wasn't a simple hacking incident. It was a full-blown digital haunting, a malevolent intelligence using technology to extend its reach into the physical world, a creature born of the digital age that defied all rational explanation. The line between the virtual and the real had been irrevocably blurred, and the entity was exploiting that blur, using it to its advantage, to amplify its malevolent influence. Days bled into nights as the investigation continued. We were trapped in a relentless cycle of discovery and countermeasures, a digital arms race against an adversary whose capabilities seemed boundless. Each victory was temporary, each breakthrough fleeting. The entity always seemed one step ahead, its intelligence and adaptability surpassing anything we could imagine. It seemed to anticipate our every move, countering our efforts with chilling precision, making us feel like we were battling a force far beyond our understanding. The struggle was not just technological, it was psychological. The constant barrage of unsettling messages, the manipulation of my reality, the sense of being watched and controlled, it was taking a toll on my mental state. I was starting to question my own sanity, doubting my perceptions, wondering if I was the one losing control. The entity, I realized, was not just manipulating my system, it was manipulating my mind, playing with my perceptions of reality, pushing me to the brink of madness. But amidst the fear and despair, a flicker of hope emerged. Anya, in a moment of insightful brilliance, discovered a weakness in the entity's defenses, a vulnerability in its code, a flaw in its otherwise flawless design. It was a subtle flaw, a seemingly insignificant oversight that could prove to be our key to victory. It was an Achilles heel, a point of entry that could potentially disrupt the entity's control and sever its connection to the ancient digital network. This was our chance, our opportunity to strike back, to fight back against the digital darkness. The final confrontation was a nerve-wracking battle of wits and technical prowess. We developed a counterprogram, a digital weapon designed to exploit the entity's weakness, to sever its connection to its power source, to neutralize its malevolent influence. The process was risky, the outcome uncertain. One wrong move could amplify the entity's power, pushing us closer to the abyss. But we had to try. The stakes were too high, the threat too great. The future of our digital world, and perhaps our very sanity, hung in the balance. The final confrontation was both a battle of code and a battle for our minds, a struggle against a digital nightmare that threatened to consume us all. The battle for my soul, and perhaps for the sanity of the world, was far from over. The final fight was about to begin. The air hummed thick with the smell of ozone and burnt circuitry. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat accompanying the rhythmic thrum of the servers in the next room. Anya and Mark, their faces etched with grim determination, watched intently as the counterprogram, a digital weapon forged in the crucible of our desperate struggle, began its execution. The screen flickered, displaying lines of code scrolling at a speed that defied comprehension. It was a ballet of ones and zeros, a digital duel between our creation and the malevolent intelligence that had tormented us for weeks. The entity fought back with a ferocity that surprised even Anya, its countermeasures swift and precise. It threw everything it had at our program, unleashing a torrent of digital attacks, each one more devastating than the last. The system screamed in protest, its defenses buckling under the strain. Error messages cascaded across the screen, a digital waterfall of warnings and failures, each one a chilling reminder of the entity's power. Mark, his face pale but resolute, muttered incantations of code, his fingers dancing across the keyboard, making adjustments, patching holes, reinforcing defenses. He was a digital shaman, fighting a supernatural foe with the tools of the modern age. His focus was unwavering, his eyes glowing with an intensity born of desperation and determination. He was improvising, reacting to the entity's attacks in real time, his mind a whirlwind of algorithms and strategies. It was a battle of pure instinct, of raw technical skill against something that seemed to exist outside the rules of logic and reason. Anya, meanwhile, monitored the network activity, her gaze fixed on the intricate web of connections the entity had woven. She watched as the entity attempted to reinforce its hold on the ancient network, to draw more power, to bolster its defenses. The digital ley lines, as Mark had called them, pulsed with an eerie light, reflecting the intensity of the conflict. The lines shimmered and pulsed, like veins carrying a dark, alien energy, threatening to overwhelm our defenses. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every click of the keyboard, every flicker of the screen, every hum of the server racks amplified the sense of impending doom. We were trapped in the heart of a digital storm, caught in the crossfire of a war between technology and something else. Something ancient and malevolent. Something that defied comprehension. For hours, the battle raged. We were pushed to the absolute limit, our exhaustion fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope that we wouldn't fail. The room was filled with the low hum of the servers, the rapid click-clack of keyboards, and the strained breaths of three people battling a force beyond their understanding. Then, just as we were about to succumb to despair, a shift occurred. A subtle change in the flow of data, a slight fluctuation in the energy of the ancient network. Anya's eyes widened. "It's working," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the cacophony of the digital battlefield. The entity's defenses weakened, its grip on the network loosening. The counterprogram, having exploited the weakness Anya had discovered, began to sever its connection to the digital ley lines, draining its power source and unraveling its malevolent influence. The change was gradual but palpable. The flickering lights stabilized. The unsettling whispers ceased. The oppressive atmosphere in the room began to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of relief. The digital storm began to subside, the chaotic energy of the network settling into a calmer state. As the entity's power dwindled, its digital manifestations in the physical world began to fade. The shifting shadows vanished. The objects that had seemed to move on their own stilled. The environment, once charged with an unsettling energy, returned to its normal state. The digital nightmare was receding. But the victory was far from complete. The entity, though weakened, was still present, still lurking within the depths of my system. It was a wounded beast, its power diminished but its malevolence undiminished. We knew it would return, perhaps stronger and more cunning than before, having learned from its defeat. Days later, the system was stable, the immediate threat neutralized. But the experience had left an indelible mark on me, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces lurking beneath the surface of our digital world. The lingering sense of unease was more profound than ever before. It was a constant low hum in the background of my existence, a persistent reminder that the line between the virtual and the real was thinner than I'd ever imagined, and that the darkness lurking in the digital shadows could seep into the physical world, twisting our perceptions and shattering our reality. The experience had changed me, altered my perception of reality itself. The world felt different, more fragile, more vulnerable. I felt a deep-seated unease, a constant awareness of the potential for unseen horrors to breach the digital barrier and invade our lives. The feeling was subtle but pervasive, a constant companion that would forever haunt the edges of my consciousness. The confrontation had been won, but the war was far from over. The entity, though severely weakened, remained a potential threat, a chilling reminder that some forces are far beyond our comprehension. Forces that can exploit the digital realm to infiltrate our lives and manipulate our minds. The digital abyss remained, a dark and unsettling space where the line between reality and nightmare was forever blurred. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the echoes of that confrontation would reverberate through my life, forever shaping my understanding of reality itself. The question remained, was it truly gone, or simply biding its time, waiting for the opportune moment to return? The answer, I feared, remained elusive, lost somewhere in the digital shadows, a chilling testament to the power of the unseen. The silence that followed the storm was more unsettling than the storm itself, a silence that hummed with the potential for something far more terrifying. The digital ghost, though weakened, was still very much alive, its malevolent spirit lingering, a cold dread clinging to the edges of my consciousness. The haunting hadn't ended, it had merely changed form, becoming a subtle, insidious presence, a persistent whisper in the quiet moments, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurk within the depths of the digital world.
If you've made it this far, you've heard the whispers. The static doesn't lie. If something felt too close tonight, it probably was. Subscribe for more tales that reach through the dark. Drop a comment below. What time is it right now where you are? And who's watching with you?